Preface. For 34 years I was primarily an institute director for the Church Educational System, CES, of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. There is much to like about the college-level discussions that sometimes occur in the institute setting. Unfortunately, our adult lessons and discussions at church rarely rise above the seminary level, even though many of our members are well educated. Our discussions are usually an inch deep and a mile wide, as they say. We seem to have a lingering desire for simple religion. We like to hear confirmations that everything is as we assumed it was. Our pioneer ancestors were heroic and inspired in the Bible and Book of Mormon are in perfect harmony. For instance, we never learn in church that the Book of Abraham papyri were discovered and translated by Egyptologists, or that researchers have studied Native American genes and what the implications are for the Book of Mormon. Questions about such topics are discouraged because they create tension. They are considered inappropriate or even heretical. This approach has isolated many of us from the rest of the world or from reality itself in those instances when we insist on things that are simply untrue. All the while, such remarkable research has been conducted over the past 30 years into Mormon origins. It is exciting to see what has been done collaboratively by church historians, the faculty of the Joseph Fielding Smith Institute for Church History at Brigham Young University, BYU history and religion professors and scholars from other disciplines and other church schools, and seminary and institute faculty, and by unaffiliated scholars. Together, they have painstakingly collated and compared accounts of the most important events in church history from the original minutes and diaries, gathered data from the environment to better understand the circumstances under which activities occurred, studied the language of the revelations and scriptures and compared it to the general idiom, and to literary expressions, excavated and restored sites, scoured archives, translated documents, gathered genealogical records and pursued traces of people's lives for additional testaments. They have published, critiqued, and re-evaluated a veritable mountain of evidence. Too much of this escapes the view of the rank and file in the church. There was a day when Latter-day Saint history was considered unworthy of this kind of attention by professional historians, in large part due to the Mormon History Association and the involvement by LDS scholars in other professional groups. This is no longer the case. Today, publishers, both academic and general interest presses, accept and publish Mormon topics on a regular basis. Yet the relatively modest print runs these books usually receive indicate that they sell mostly to other professionals rather than to the LDS public at large. There is a lingering distrust of anything that hasn't come directly from, or with an endorsement by, the church leadership. Some of this research has been conducted by critics of the church. Some of it contains distortions and is unreliable. But much of what even the critics have written is backed by solid investigation and sound reasoning and should not be dismissed. Your friends don't always tell you what you need to hear. Furthermore, it is untrue that non-Mormons who write about the church are de facto anti-Mormon. Many outside historians are good friends and supporters of the church, and many find the topics interesting for their own sake without any agenda. About a decade and a half ago, there was some consternation and confusion over Mark Hoffman's forgeries and murders. In fact, it has taken a while to sort through and correct the damage he caused. Ironically, while the LDS Church supported the forgeries, two of the church's most visible critics never accepted their validity. Despite the setback to history caused by Hoffman, the ranks of honest and earnest historians have continued their research and writing. Over the years, scholars of all stripes have made contributions and counterbalanced each other by critiquing each other's works. We now have a body of authentic, reliable documents and a near consensus on many of the details. From this base, the overall picture of Mormon origins begins to unfold. This picture is much different from what we hear in the modified versions that are taught in Sunday school, but demythologized, placed in its original time and place, amid all the twists and turns that exist in the real world. It rings true. There has not been an attempt to eliminate the spiritual from the secular. Far from that, the foundational stories are in many cases more spiritual, less temporal, and more stirring. Whatever else, They are also fascinating, to know the personalities involved in these events and to hear them tell their experiences in their own original words before everything was recast for hierarchical and proselyting purposes is to see it all in an entirely new and exciting perspective. That said, I have wondered how I should introduce my work. How should I convey what I feel in my soul? First, this book is not intended for children or investigators. So much of our attention is directed toward children and potential converts that long-standing adult members rarely have an opportunity to speak freely to each other. We worry that tender ears may overhear. I am a fourth-generation Mormon, and I want to address this discussion to other second, third, and fourth-generation Mormons who will better understand where I am coming from. Lest there be any question, let me say that my intent is to increase faith, not to diminish it. Still, faith needs to be built on truth, what is, in fact, true and believable. After that comes the great leap. We too often confuse faith with knowledge. Faith has to do with the unknown, not about what can be proven or can be shown to be reasonably based on the evidence. I have always thought that an unwillingness to submit one's beliefs to rigorous scrutiny is a manifestation of weakness of faith. Otherwise, everything becomes a matter of orthodoxy rather than truth. These are matters that I wrestled with for years. As a young man, I became involved in CES because of my commitment to the gospel and my love of the scriptures, and also because of my passion for church history. These remain priorities today. I see a number of things differently now than I did before I embarked on this lifelong study of, and service to, the church. I volunteered toward the end of my career to be the LDS Institute Director at the Salt Lake County Jail. I looked forward to focusing on basic Bible teachings and doing some counseling. I also hoped that I might resolve some of my own questions in an atmosphere where I could freely contemplate them. Now that I am retired, I find myself compelled to discuss in public what I pondered mostly in private. At that time, I have two purposes in writing. One is to introduce church members who have not followed the developments in church history during the last 30 years to issues that are central to the topic of Mormon origins. I hope my survey will be enlightening and useful to anyone who has wanted to understand what has been termed the new Mormon history. Second, I would like church members to understand historians and religion teachers like myself. When I or my colleagues talk or write about the LDS past, we tend to avoid superlatives that members expect when hearing a recital of our history. Their ears finely tuned to the nuances of such parlance, they assume that we have secularized the story, that we are intentionally obtuse, or that we split hairs. They have heard that we are revisionists, and by this they understand that we are rewriting history in a way that was never intended. In truth, we are salvaging the earliest, authentic versions of these stories from the ravages of well-meaning censors who have abridged and polished them for institutional purposes. Wallace B. Smith, President Emeritus of the RLDS Church, now the Community of Christ, writing about the foundation experiences of Mormonism, observed, "One thing is clear. The genie is out of the bottle and it cannot be put back." Facts uncovered and the questions raised by the new Mormon historians will not go away. They will have to be dealt with if we are to maintain a position of honesty and integrity in our dealings with our own members as well as our friends in the larger religious community. I find this position to be both refreshing and healthy. I also agree with Thomas Jefferson, who taught that however discomforting a free exchange may be, truth will ultimately emerge the victor. President Hugh B. Brown, a counselor in the LDS presidency during the 1960s, echoed on behalf of the church, "I admire men and women who have developed the questioning spirit, who are unafraid of new ideas as stepping stones to progress." We should, of course, respect the opinions of others, but we should also be unafraid to dissent, if we are informed. Thoughts and expressions compete in the marketplace of thought, and in that competition truth emerges triumphant. Only error fears freedom of expression. This free exchange of ideas is not to be deplored as long as men and women remain humble and teachable. Neither fear of consequence or any kind of coercion should ever be used to secure uniformity of thought in the church. People should express their problems and opinions and be unafraid to think without fear of ill consequences. We must preserve freedom of the mind in the church and resist all efforts to suppress it. These and similar sentiments motivate me in my current endeavor. I do not believe that what I have written is flawless, but I lay out the evidence and state the implications of what I see as clearly as possible. My years of teaching have taught me that if I am not direct, my point is missed. However, there is also a downside to such straightforwardness. If I seem provocative or insensitive, or if I offend, it is not my intention. These are issues that are deeply important to me. I do not treat them lightly, whatever the shortcomings of my prose. Yet, I feel good that I do not cloak the issues in ambiguities, with an overdose of qualifiers and disclaimers. I find these matters to be so engaging that, for me, they bring church history to life for the first time. If nothing else, the reader may sense my enthusiasm, which can be boundless, I admit. Perhaps the reader is already puzzled by this lengthy dialogue on historiography and freedom of belief. If so, let me state clearly what can be expected from this book. I, along with colleagues, and drawing from years of research, find the evidence employed to support many traditional claims about the Church to be either non-existent or problematic. In other words, it didn't all happen the way we've been told. For the sake of accuracy and honesty, I think we need to address and ultimately correct this disparity between historical narratives and the inspirational stories that are told in church. Hopefully my book will be received in the spirit in which it is intended. As English philosopher John Stuart Mill said, any attempt to resist another opinion is a peculiar evil. If the opinion is right, we are robbed of the opportunity of exchanging error for truth. If it is wrong, we are deprived of a deeper understanding of the truth in its collision with error. On 4th to 5th January 1922, B. H. Roberts, senior president of the Church's 7 Presidents of the 70, presented to ranking church leaders what he called Book of Mormon difficulties, discussed in Chapter 2 of this book. Elder Roberts said in a church which claimed continuous revelation, a crisis had arisen where revelation was necessary. He hoped his brethren would bring the inspiration of the Lord to solve these problems. However, after his presentations, his colleagues reaffirmed their testimonies of the Book of Mormon and offered no solutions. I would like to renew Elder Roberts's call for a more candid discussion of the foundations of the Church beginning with the Book of Mormon. I discuss these issues in 8 chapters, the first of which evaluates Joseph Smith's efforts at translation. Chapters 2 to 4 examine Joseph's intellectual environment, including the King James Bible, evangelical religion, and American antiquities, all of which influenced the content of the Book of Mormon. Chapter 4 also discusses religious feelings and the Holy Ghost. Chapters 5-6 reveal the impact of folk beliefs on 2 early claims of Mormonism. Chapters 7-8 investigate priesthood restoration and Joseph's first vision, detailing the developments and what precipitated the changes in the history of these 2 experiences. I wish to thank my friends and colleagues who agreed to be readers of my first and subsequent drafts for their many helpful suggestions and encouragement. It is good to have critics, but it is also good to have such reassuring friends. Joseph Smith, as translator-revelator, one of Joseph Smith's primary prophetic gifts was the translation of ancient documents by the power of God. He used the word translate to explain his work on the Book of Mormon, the Bible, Egyptian papyri, the Kinderhook plates, a Greek psalter, and a lost parchment written by the Apostle John. Although the word translate may be as useful as any other, it inadequately explains the process by which these scriptures came to be. In this chapter 1 we'll examine the historical record, specifically what Joseph Smith, his family, and other early church leaders had to say on this topic, and consider what we can conclude about the way in which the Book of Mormon was dictated. The Book of Mormon. The Church teaches that the golden plates were an ancient record received and translated into English by Joseph Smith. Illustrations in the Church magazine, The Ensign, depict the prophet studying the plates much like an archaeologist or classicist might. This view is not supported by what Joseph Smith's scribes and other witnesses said. On the contrary, the eyewitnesses reported that Joseph read the English text as it appeared, word for word, in the seer stone, sometimes called the interpreters, which he placed in his hat, his face over the hat's opening to shut out the light. Those who reported this include Emma Hale Smith, Joseph's wife, Isaac Hale, Joseph's father-in-law, Michael Morse, brother-in-law, Martin Harris, and Joseph Knight Sr. Morse said that he watched Joseph on several occasions. The mode of procedure consisted in Joseph's placing the seer stone in the crown of a hat, then putting his face into the hat, so as to entirely cover his face, resting his elbows upon his knees, and then dictating, word after word, while the scribe wrote it down. See Figure 2. The Book of Mormon was dictated first in Harmony, Pennsylvania, then in Fayette, New York, where it was completed in Fayette. David Whitmer and Elizabeth A. Whitmer, later the wife of Oliver Cowdery, observed the dictation process and reported that Joseph used a seer stone placed in his hat, the same as previously reported. In other words, the method was consistent throughout the project and it did not constitute what we would normally consider to be a translation. With his face covered, Joseph was unable to see the source document, the golden plates, even if the plates were nearby. More than often they were not. For a time Emma Smith acted as her husband's scribe. She said that she received dictation from him as he sat with his face buried in his hat, hour after hour with nothing between us. Occasionally, she said, the plates lay on the table, wrapped in a small linen tablecloth, but she was never allowed to see them, a decision which caused her to murmur. See Doctrine and Covenants 25:4, hereafter D and C. David Whitmer confirmed that Joseph did not use the plates in the translation and that the plates were not before Joseph, while he translated, but seemed to have been removed by the custodian angel. Isaac Hale said that while Joseph was translating, the plates were hid in the woods. Martin Harris and Joseph Smith Sr., respectively, added that the plates were covered in the box and hid in the mountains while they were being translated. Shortly after becoming Joseph's full-time scribe in April the 18th to the 29th, Oliver Cowdery learned that just as the plates were not necessary for translation, other source documents could be read without being present. In a disagreement between the two men over whether John the Revelator was on earth or in heaven, Joseph, through a stone, translated the answer from a record made on parchment by John and hidden up by himself somewhere in the Middle East. D and C 7, head note. Thus the testimony from Joseph's closest associates, relatives, and scribes was that the golden plates were not directly used in the translation. No primary witness reported that Joseph used them in any way, as we otherwise might assume he would need to in translating them. It would be relevant to note here that in the Book of Mormon, King Mosiah translated ancient records using seer stones or interpreters, two stones set in eye frames or spectacles, Mosiah 8:13, 28:13-16. In the Book of Mormon there is a specific prophecy that Joseph Smith would be able to read the Book of Mormon's Nephite record using Mosiah's interpreters. It foretells that Joseph will read the words which I shall give unto thee, 2 Nephi 27:11, 20. 22, 24. The Lord had prepared spectacles for to read the book, Joseph Smith explained. In other words, neither Mosiah nor Joseph Smith could read the ancient scripts as a scholar would, rather, they read what they saw, provided for them in their own language. When they looked into the stones, converts to Mormonism in the early days understood that when Joseph looked in the seer stone, he was shown the English text. He was a reader rather than a translator. Martin Harris clerked for Joseph in 1828 and informed classical scholar Charles Anthon and Episcopal minister John A. Clark that Joseph saw the text in English. Joseph simply read the translation, Harris said. When Joseph looked through his spectacles, he would then write down or repeat what he saw, which, when repeated aloud, was written down by Harris. Years later Harris described this to church member Edward Stevenson, who wrote by aid of the seer stone. Sentences would appear and were read by the prophet and written by Martin. If correctly written, that sentence would disappear and another appear in its place. David Whitmer announced that on the seer stone appeared the writing. Joseph would read off the English to Oliver Cowdery. Joseph Knight Sr., an early convert, explained now the way he translated was he put the Urim and Thummim into his hat and darkened his eyes, then he would take a sentence and it would appear in bright Roman letters, then he would tell the writer and he would write it, then that would go away and the next sentence would come and so on. In an 1830 court trial in New York, Oliver Cowdery, testified under oath, that said Smith found with the plates, from which he translated his book, 2 transparent stones. Through these, he was able to read in English, the reformed Egyptian characters. Some writers have cited the revelations given to Oliver Cowdery in April the 18th to the 29th as evidence that Joseph was more than a reader. These sections explain how Oliver translated using his gift, a rod of nature, divining rod, rather than Joseph's use of seer stones. 6:25-28. When Oliver was young, he was taught how to handle a divining rod and ask it questions in faith. This, when accompanied by the Spirit, caused the rod to move and meant that the answer was yes. If the rod did not move, the answer was no. This process was more difficult than reading from a stone. It required patience. When Cowdery attempted to apply it to translation, he ultimately did not continue. D&C 9:3-5. That Joseph claimed to be reading an ancient text within a stone soon caused trouble. Critics who sought to test this claim stole 116 pages of the Book of Mormon transcript, then apparently waited to see if Joseph should bring forth the same words again. According to a revelation recorded in May the 18th to the 29th, the critics would say, if he bringeth forth the same words, behold, we have the same words with us, and we have altered them, therefore they will not agree, and we will say that he has lied in his words, and that he has no gift. D&C 10:17-18, Book of Mormon, 1830 edition, Preface. This is problematic. If these critics had altered the words, as Joseph divined they had, and produced the original manuscript to discredit him, the alterations in a different handwriting would have been readily apparent. Aside from that, there is an assumption that was unchallenged by Joseph Smith that a second translation would be identical to the first. This confirms the view that the English text existed in some kind of unalterable, spiritual form rather than that someone had to think through difficult conceptual issues and idioms, always resulting in variance in any translation. Joseph avoided this test altogether by translating a different version of the same story from a different set of plates, said to have been attached to the original plates. Interestingly, from this time on, whenever Joseph spoke of translation, he emphasized that he translated by the gift and power of God, which was a more general statement. See 11th of June the 18th to the 29th. Copyright, title page and testimony of 3 witnesses, both in the Book of Mormon. These more general statements after June the 18th to the 29th did not conflict with his earlier explanations but did not rule out the possibility that he had been a reader. Thus David Whitmer, Martin Harris, Joseph Knight Sr., Oliver Cowdery, and others could say that they understood Joseph to say that he read from the stone. The question is whether or not Joseph could indeed read text from a stone or whether the stone was a device to enhance concentration or a prop for the benefit of onlookers. Previously he was employed as a skier for treasure hunters, and was brought to court 3 times for stone gazing. The fact that he and his colleagues never obtained any riches by this method may argue against the efficacy of the endeavor. Of interest is the testimony given in the July the 18th to the 30th trial, heard before Justice Joseph Chamberlain of Bainbridge, New York. The proceedings were reported by A. W. Benton, a young medical doctor who lived in South Bainbridge during the trial. It was shown that the Book of Mormon was brought to light by the same magic power by which Joseph pretended to tell fortunes, discover hidden treasures, and Addison Austin was next called upon, who testified that he was with Smith alone, and that Austin asked Smith to tell him honestly whether he could see this money or not. Smith hesitated some time, but finally replied, "To be candid, between you and me, I cannot, any more than you or anybody else, but any way to get a living." The same information was also conveyed under oath at Joseph's 2nd July the 18th to the 30th trial in front of Justice Joel K. Noble of Colesville, New York. Noble wrote Joe was asked by witness Austin if he could see or tell more than others. Joe said he could not and says, "Anything for a living. I now and then get a shilling." Isaac Hale, Alva Hale, and Peter Ingersoll each signed affidavits stating that Joseph said the same to them. We don't know how accurately these statements may reflect something that might have been said in a certain context. For instance, if Joseph attempted to explain the spiritual rather than mechanical aspect of seer stones, people may have misunderstood him. In any case, Peter Ingersoll, whose Palmyra property adjoined the Smiths on the north, reported what he overheard Joseph say. Sometime after Joseph and Emma eloped in January the 18th to the 27th, Ingersoll helped them return to Emma's parents' home in Harmony, Pennsylvania, to collect her furniture and other belongings. Ingersoll said he witnessed a very emotional scene. His father-in-law, Mr. Hale, addressed Joseph, "In a flood of tears you have stolen my daughter and married her. I had much rather have followed her to her grave. You spend your time in digging for money, pretend to see in a stone, and thus try to deceive people." Joseph wept, and acknowledged he could not see in a stone now, nor never could. He then promised to give up his old habits of digging for money and looking into stones. Another possibility is that Joseph told his early followers that he could read documents from a stone because it was easy for them to conceptualize. They already believed that scholars could find hidden treasures that way. The interpreters, later called the Urim and Thummim, had a sense of biblical authority to them. On the other hand, the Old Testament Urim and Thummim seem to have been two objects that were thrown like a pair of dice and then observed for God's yes or no answer. There is no evidence that they were used to translate languages. Again, it is interesting that after the lost manuscript incident, Joseph became more vague in his explanation to others about how he translated. Although Joseph said he was a reader rather than a literal translator of the Book of Mormon, it has become clear that he was also a participant in the book's creation. He made textual alterations in 1837, changing passages that described the Father and the Son as one God to a description of them as distinct and separate beings. He did not view the original text as inviolate, in other words. Otherwise the corrected text would either reflect a previous error upon God or upon the translator for changing God's words as read from the stone. Perhaps Joseph placed his face in the hat and dictated to his scribe the revelatory sudden strokes of ideas that entered into his mind. Usually he did not mind if others observed him translating, but sometimes he separated himself from his scribe. Martin Harris reported that while he wrote for Joseph, a thick curtain or blanket was suspended between them and that Joseph was behind a curtain, behind a sheet, or that he would sit in a different room, or upstairs. Since the gold plates were not used during the translation, why the curtain? No 19th century church member mentions that Joseph used notes or books, but scholars have determined that he consulted an open Bible, specifically a printing of the King James translation dating from 1769 or later, including its errors. The Bible. To continue the discussion of what Joseph meant by the word translate, between 1830 and 1833 he worked on a translation of the Bible, the Joseph Smith translation, abbreviated as JST, intending to eliminate or restore material by the power of God. He gave consideration to all the books from Genesis to Revelation, but most of the changes were confined to Genesis and Matthew. His added insights and a few deletions have provided us with a document that is often cited in the LDS Church today. Unfortunately, none of the significant additions or deletions have been supported by the numerous Old and New Testament manuscript finds since 1833. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls provided us with Hebrew manuscripts for all of the Old Testament, except Esther, that are 1,000 years earlier than any previously known 100 BC. Manuscripts for New Testament texts now date to about AD 200. We could expect that with these many discoveries over the last 172 years, some important confirming evidence should be available for Joseph's alterations of the Bible. Such is not the case. Moreover, some of Joseph's doctrinal changes in the JST are at odds with current LDS beliefs. For example, KJV Luke 10:22 reads, "No man knoweth who the Son is, but the Father, and who the Father is, but the Son, and he to whom the Son will reveal him." The JST reads, "No man knoweth that the Son is the Father, and the Father is the Son, but him to whom the Son will reveal it." In 1 Timothy 2-4, Joseph expands the verse to clarify that the Father and Son is one God. This view is consistent with Joseph's other scriptural writings of 1829-34 but not with his later thought. All of these JST changes suggest that they were personal insights rather than authoritative statements or reflections of the intent of the original authors. The Book of Abraham, on 27th of November 1967, 11 pieces of Egyptian papyri originally purchased by Joseph Smith were recovered from the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. Among them were Facsimile 1 and Papyrus 11, both important to Joseph Smith in his translation of Abraham 1, 2-18 in the Pearl of Great Price. Egyptologists discovered that Facsimile 1, Papyri 10 and 11, and Facsimile 3 belonged to the same original scroll, written for a deceased man named Hor. The original Facsimile 1 has the altar scene which has long been printed as part of the Pearl of Great Price and, flanking the picture, 5 lines of hieroglyphics. When translated, these lines reveal the titles of Hor, his parentage, and that he is the deceased man lying on the altar. Figures 3-4. The adjoining papyrus, number 11, again gives Hor's name, the name of Tkhibit his mother, and instructions for wrapping his mummy. Figure 5. Joseph Smith used this papyrus as his source for Abraham 1-2-18. The next adjoining papyrus, number 10, again identifies Hor as he progresses through the Egyptian funeral rites. Figure 6. Culminating with facsimile number 3. Here Hor's name appears at the top and bottom of the illustration, showing him in a judgment scene with Osiris and other familiar Egyptian gods associated with these rites. Figure 7. According to scholars, the scroll was written during the 1st century BC. The papyri do not deal with Abraham. In fact, Abraham's name does not appear anywhere in this narrative. In 1967, most Latter-day Saints anticipated that Joseph's translation of the Book of Abraham would be confirmed. The documents were turned over to Hugh Nibley of Brigham Young University, and between January 1968 and May 1970, he produced a lengthy series of articles on Egyptian culture and related topics in the Church magazine. The Improvement Era. Although no translations of the papyri appeared in the era, nor did Nibley correct the clear identification of Hor, not Abraham, in Facsimile 1, Papyri 10 and 11, and Facsimile 3.39 clearly, the first place to look for the interpretation of Facsimiles 1 and 3 is in the writing directly around these pictures. Nibley ignored this writing and instead focused on Egyptian temple ritual, assembling culturally and spatially unrelated Abrahamic legends over several thousand years of history to demonstrate that the Book of Abraham had the support of some ancient traditions. In reality, Joseph Smith apparently used other sources in translating the Book of Abraham. In 1835, the year he produced the opening chapters of Abraham, his counselor Oliver Cowdery, in The Messenger and Advocate, mentioned Josephus 3 times in interpreting the pictures from the Joseph of Egypt scroll. In the Antiquities of the Jews, Josephus wrote about how Noah, who had trouble with his son Ham, cursed his posterity, whereas the lineage of Abraham and others escaped that curse. Joseph Smith expanded this original curse, Genesis 9:20-27, to include denial of priesthood ordination to blacks. Abraham 1:21-26. LDS scholar Lester Bush, with these Abraham verses in mind, commented Mormon scripture the Book of Abraham and the contemporary pro-slavery arguments are striking. Josephus further identified Abraham as a resident of Chaldea and a person of great sagacity who began to have higher notions of virtue than others had, and he determined to renew and to change the opinion all men happened then to have concerning God. Abraham's preaching was not welcome. They raised a tumult against him, and by the assistance of God, he came and lived in the land of Canaan. While in Canaan, a land promised to his posterity, Abraham encountered a famine. This brought him and his wife Sarah to Egypt, where he successfully pretended to be his wife's brother. The Pharaoh eventually allowed him to enter into conversation with the most learned among the Egyptians, from which conversation his virtue and his reputation became more conspicuous than they had been before. He communicated to them arithmetic, and delivered to them the science of astronomy. for before Abram came into Egypt they were unacquainted with those parts of learning, this sketched by Josephus, which was available to Joseph Smith. Figure 8, explains why, upon examining facsimile 1 of the Hor Papyrus, Joseph might have assumed that Abraham was being sacrificed for preaching against heathen gods, but escaped with God's assistance. Viewing the other end of the scroll, Joseph further saw, facsimile 3, Abraham teaching astronomy in Pharaoh's court just as Josephus's narrative portrays. For other parallels, see the appendix to this chapter. The Abraham material available in Joseph Smith's own environment provided a reasonable source for his interpretation of the two pictures and the Egyptian writing between them. Joseph himself believed that his source for interpreting the Hor scroll was a divine gift to intuit the meaning of Egyptian characters by the spirit of revelation. Facsimile 3, see figures 2, 4, and 5. Clearly demonstrates that he believed that these Egyptian characters supported his spiritual impressions. Figure 9. Unfortunately, his interpretations have been shown by Egyptologists today to be a misreading of the papyri. The primary source for chapters 2, 4, and 5 of Abraham is Genesis 1, 2, 11, verse 28 to 29. And 12. 66 out of 77 verses in this section of Abraham, 86%, are quotations or close paraphrases of KJV wording. The few Hebrew names and words in the Abraham text reflect Joseph's study under the Hebrew scholar Joshua Satius in Kirtland, Ohio, during the winter of 1835–36. The differences between these Genesis and Abraham chapters appear to be Joseph's targumizing, interpreting or paraphrasing, of the Bible. Chapters 4 and 5 of Abraham reflect Joseph's changing theology on the Godhead. From 1820 to 1834 he believed that there is one God, as seen in the Book of Mormon, the Testimony of the Three Witnesses, the Book of Commandments 24, 13 to 18, the Book of Moses, the JST, and the 1832 account of his first vision. By 1835 he had come to believe that two personages formed the Godhead, as taught in the Doctrine and Covenants 20–28, compare Book of Commandments chapter 24, verse 18, the Lectures on Faith, 5, and the 1835 and 1838 accounts of his first vision. From 1839 on, he preached a plurality of gods, as seen in Abraham 4 and 5 and the LDS temple ceremony. His evolving concept of God suggests that he imposed his own changing view onto the Abrahamic period as well as onto other periods of history. The implication is that the material in these chapters is not a translation of some ancient records, as the heading of the Book of Abraham claims, but rather 19th century sources. The astronomical phrases and concepts in the Abraham texts were also common in Joseph Smith's environment. For example, in 1816 Thomas Taylor published a 2-volume work called The 6 Books of Proclus on the Theology of Plato. Volume 2, pages 140–46, contains phrases and ideas similar to the astronomical concepts in Abraham 3 and facsimile number 2. In these 6 pages, Taylor calls the planets governors and uses the terms fixed stars and planets and grand key. Both works refer to the Sun as a planet receiving its light and power from a higher sphere rather than generating its own light through hydrogen-helium fusion. Compare facsimile 2, figure 5. LDS scholar R. Grant A research astronomer and director of the University of Colorado Observatory, has written, at the time that the Book of Abraham was translated, the energy source of the Sun was unknown, and the concept of one star influencing another was also a common concept of the time. Further reflecting 19th century cosmology, Taylor, compare Abraham chapter 3, verse 4–10, describes the progression of time among the universal bodies. Like Abraham chapter 3, verse 16–19, certain people of Joseph Smith's day also believed in progressive orders of orbs and the intelligences that inhabited them. According to A, they believed that the surface of the Sun was solid, and that it was inhabited by human beings. In fact, They believed that it was inhabited by man. They also believed that all the planets in the solar system were inhabited by man, and the moon as well. The concept of multiple world systems, multiple dwellings of man, was a rather common topic of that time. Klaus Hansen, an LDS scholar, has written the progressive aspect of Joseph's theology, as well as its cosmology, while in a general way compatible with antebellum thought, bears some remarkable resemblances to Thomistic's philosophy of a future state, a second edition of which had been published in 1830. Joseph Smith owned a copy of this work, and Oliver Cowdery in December 1836 quoted some lengthy excerpts from it in The Messenger and Advocate, Figure 10. Hansen continues, some very striking parallels to Smith's theology suggest that the similarities between the two may be more than coincidental. Dick's lengthy book, an ambitious treatise on astronomy and metaphysics, proposed the idea that matter is eternal and indestructible and rejected the notion of a creation ex nihilo. Much of the book dealt with the infinity of the universe, made up of innumerable stars spread out over immeasurable distances. Dick speculated that many of these stars were peopled by various orders of intelligences and that these intelligences were progressive beings in various stages of evolution toward perfection. In the Book of Abraham, part of which consists of a treatise on astronomy and cosmology, eternal beings of various orders and stages of development likewise populate numerous stars. They, too, are called intelligences. Dick speculated that the systems of the universe revolve around a common center, the throne of God. In the Book of Abraham, one star named Kolob was nearest unto the throne of God. Other stars, in ever diminishing order, were placed in increasing distances from this center. Hansen observed further that according to the Book of Abraham, the patriarch had a knowledge of the times of various planets, until thou come nigh unto Kolob, which Kolob is after the reckoning of the Lord's time, which Kolob is set nigh unto the throne of God, to govern all those planets which belong to the same order as that upon which thou standest. One revolution of Kolob was a day unto the Lord, after his manner of reckoning, it being 1,000 years according to the time appointed unto that whereon thou standest. This is the reckoning of the Lord's time, according to the reckoning of Kolob. God's time thus conformed perfectly to the laws of Galilean relativity and Newtonian mechanics. What we find in Abraham 3 and the official scriptures of the LDS Church regarding science reflects a Newtonian world concept. The Catholic Church's Ptolemaic cosmology was displaced by the new Copernican and Newtonian world model, just as the 19th century, canonized, Newtonian worldview is challenged by Einstein's 20th century science. Keith Norman, a Mormon scholar, has written that for the LDS Church, it is no longer possible to pretend there is no conflict. He continues, scientific cosmology began its leap forward just when Mormon doctrine was becoming stabilized. The revolution in 20th century physics precipitated by Einstein dethroned Newtonian physics as the ultimate explanation of the way the universe works. Relativity theory and quantum mechanics, combined with advances in astronomy, have established a vastly different picture of how the universe began, how it is structured and operates, and the nature of matter and energy. This new scientific cosmology poses a serious challenge to the Mormon version of the universe. Many of the astronomical and cosmological ideas found in both Joseph Smith's environment and in the Book of Abraham have become out of vogue, and some of these Newtonian concepts are scientific relics. The evidence suggests that the Book of Abraham reflects concepts of Joseph Smith's time and place rather than those of an ancient world. The Book of Joseph. When Joseph acquired 2 rolls of Egyptian papyri from Michael Chandler in July 1835, he said that one of the rolls contained the writings of Abraham, another the writings of Joseph of Egypt. William W. Phelps, his scribe, wrote in 1835, as no one could translate these writings, they were presented to President Smith. He soon knew what they were and said they, the rolls of papyrus, contain the sacred record kept of Joseph in Pharaoh's court in Egypt, and the teachings of Father Abraham. LDS Apostle Orson Pratt and church historian John Whitmer described how Joseph determined that the 2 scrolls before him were the writings of Joseph and Abraham of antiquity. Pratt recalled Mr. Chandler presented to him the ancient characters, asking him if he could translate them. The prophet took them and repaired to his room and inquired of the Lord concerning them. The Lord told him they were sacred records, containing the inspired writings of Abraham when he was in Egypt, and also those of Joseph, while he was in Egypt. The prophet Joseph, having learned the value of the ancient writings, was very anxious to obtain them, and expressed himself wishful to purchase them. Whitmer wrote that Joseph the seer saw these records and by the revelation of Jesus Christ could translate these records, which gave an account of our forefathers, much of which was written by Joseph of Egypt. Albert Brown, a Kirtland Church member, wrote to his father on 1st of November 1835 that some of the papyri contained the history of Joseph while in Egypt. These records were bought by the church and also the mummies and are now in Kirtland. They bought the mummies for the sake of the record and paid $2,400 for them. Many of the learned have been able to tell but very little about them, and yet Joseph, without any of the wisdom of this world, can read them and know what they are. Oliver Cowdery gave an excellent description in the church periodical, The Messenger and Advocate, of the pictures on Joseph's record. The representation of the Godhead, 3, yet in one figure. 11. The serpent, represented as walking, or formed in a manner to be able to walk, standing in front of, and near a female figure. Enoch's pillar, as mentioned in Josephus, is upon the same roll. Figure 12. The inner end of the same roll, Joseph's record, presents a representation of the judgment. Cowdery further identified the book of Joseph in this article when he wrote upon the subject of the Egyptian records, or rather the writings of Abraham and Joseph. I may say a few words. This record is beautifully written on papyrus with black, and a small part, red ink or paint, in perfect preservation. When 11 pieces of the lost Egyptian papyri collection were rediscovered and acquired in 1967, it was easy to identify the source of the Book of Joseph. The Abraham roll does not have red ink on it, is not well preserved, and is easily identifiable because of facsimile 1. In comparison, the second roll is beautifully written, well preserved, and has characters in red ink throughout. Of these 11 papyri, numbers 2 and 4 to 8 belong to this second roll. The latter 5 have red ink characters, and numbers 4 to 5 were clearly described by Cowdery in The Messenger and Advocate. Egyptologists have determined that these papyri were originally connected together before Joseph Smith had them cut into individual pieces. Papyri 2 and 4 to 8 were originally owned by Tashert-Min, daughter of Nskantsu, whose Egyptian funerary rites were preparing her to be received into the presence of Osiris, according to the modern translations. This raises a question not only about Joseph Smith's interpretation of the scrolls but also about the reformed Egyptian characters he said he copied from the gold plates in 1827-29. Prior to purchasing the papyri, Smith showed Chandler a number of characters like those upon the writings of Mr. Chandler's papyri which were previously copied from the plates, containing the history of the Nephites, or Book of Mormon. If the plates were available today and if their writing were in translatable Egyptian, we can only wonder what they might contain. Kinder hook plates. On 23 April 1843, 6 brass plates were recovered by a group of men from an earth mound near Kinderhook, Pike County, Illinois, and were brought 6 days later to Nauvoo for Joseph Smith to translate. Charlotte Haven, a Nauvoo resident, wrote on 2nd May to her family, Mr. Joshua Moore last Saturday 29 April brought with him half a dozen thin pieces of brass, apparently very old, in the form of a bell about 5 or 6 inches long. They had on them scratches that looked like writing, and strange figures like symbolic characters. They were recently found, he said, in a mound a few miles below Quincy. When he showed them to Joseph Smith, the latter said that the figures or writing on them was similar to that in which the Book of Mormon was written, and if Mr. Moore could leave them, he thought that by the help of revelation he would be able to translate them. On 1st May 1843, Joseph Smith's trusted clerk, William Clayton, married Joseph to Lucy Walker. On the same date, Clayton recorded Joseph's declaration that the Kinderhook plates were genuine and that he had translated part of them, Clayton wrote, I have seen 6 brass plates which were found in Adams County by some persons who were digging in a mound. They are covered with ancient characters of language containing from 30 to 40 on each side of the plates. President J. Joseph has translated a portion and says they contain the history of the person with whom they were found, and he was a descendant of Ham through the loins of Pharaoh king of Egypt, and that he received his kingdom from the ruler of heaven and earth. Apostle Parley P. Pratt wrote from Nauvoo to a cousin 6 days later. 6 plates having the appearance of brass have lately been dug out of a mound by a gentleman in Pike County, Illinois. They are small and filled with engravings in Egyptian language and contain the genealogy of one of the ancient Jaredites back to Ham the son of Noah. The gentlemen who found them were unconnected with the church, but have brought them to Joseph Smith for examination and translation. A large number of citizens here have seen them and compared the characters with those on the Egyptian papyri which is now in this city. Joseph Smith thought enough of the history of this Jaredite descendant of Ham to direct LDS member Reuben Hadlock to make woodcuts of the plates for future publication. By 24 June the church was advertising that the contents of the plates, together with a facsimile of the same, will be published in the Times and Seasons, as soon as their translation is completed. Figure 13. The Kinderhook hoax began to unravel in 1855 when W. P. Harris, a witness who had helped unearth the plates, wrote some years since, I was present with a number at or near Kinderhook, and helped to dig at the time the plates were found. The plates were found in the pit by Mr. Fat Grubb. I washed and cleaned the plates and subsequently made an honest affidavit to the same, but since that time, Bridge Whitton said to me that he cut and prepared the plates and he, B. Whitton, and R. Wiley engraved them themselves, and that there was nitric acid put upon them the night before to rust the iron ring and band, and that they were carried to the mound, rubbed in the dirt and carefully dropped into the pit where they were found. In June 1879 Wilbur Fugate, another of the original group who recovered the plates, confessed that the plates were fabricated. Fugate stated that the plates were a humbug, gotten up by Robert Wiley, Bridge Whitton and myself. Whitton cut them out of some pieces of copper, Wiley and I made the hieroglyphics by making impressions on beeswax and filling them with acid and putting it on the plates. When they were finished we put them together with rust made of nitric acid, old iron and lead, and bound them with a piece of hoop iron, covering them completely with the rust. Wiley went to the mound where he had previously dug to the depth of about 8 feet, there being a flat rock that sounded hollow beneath, and put them under it. Some Latter-day Saints have wondered if the Harris and Fugate statements are credible and have pointed to the fact that the artifacts have not been available for independent testing. In 1921 of the plates came into the possession of the Chicago Historical Society. Dr. D. Lynn Johnson, a Northwestern University materials engineer and a Latter-day Saint, conducted some sophisticated electronic and chemical tests on the tablet in 1980. Figure 14, and concluded the plate owned by the Chicago Historical Society, and known as the Kinderhook plate, is made from a brass alloy consistent with the technology of the middle 19th century. The characters on the plate were formed by etching with acid, probably nitric acid. This confirms the statements by Harris and Fugate about how the tablets were made and aged in April 1843. A Greek sculptor, Henry Caswell's experience with Joseph Smith at Nauvoo on 18th to 19th of April 1842 expresses the frustration of an increasing number of LDS students with Joseph's ability to translate ancient documents. Caswell was a visiting minister from England who was shown the Egyptian papyri. He decided to test Joseph's credibility by presenting him with a known, ancient Greek psalter for his examination. Caswell, who probably exaggerates Joseph's frontier grammar and idiom, said he asked me if I had any idea of its meaning. I replied, that I believed it to be a Greek psalter, but that I should like to hear his opinion. No, he said, it ain't Greek at all, except, perhaps, a few words. This book is very valuable. It is a dictionary of Egyptian hieroglyphics. Pointing to the capital letters at the commencement of each verse, he said them figures is Egyptian hieroglyphics, and them which follows, is the interpretation of the hieroglyphics, written in the Reformed Egyptian. Them characters is like the letters that was engraven on the golden plates. Caswell told this incident to Dr. Willard Richards, a Mormon apostle, to which the Mormon doctor said, "Sometimes Mr. Smith speaks as a prophet, and sometimes as a mere man." If he gave a wrong opinion respecting the book, he spoke as a mere man. I said, whether he spoke as a prophet or as a mere man, he has committed himself, for he has said what is not true. If he spoke as a prophet, therefore, he is a false prophet. If he spoke as a mere man, he cannot be trusted, for he spoke positively and like an oracle respecting that of which he knew nothing. While it is true that we have only Caswell's view of this incident, it is consistent with Joseph's pattern of rather quickly determining the value and content of unknown documents that were presented to him. My conclusion is that a large body of evidence demonstrates that Joseph mistranslated a number of documents. I know of no substantial evidence to support his claim to have ever literally translated any document, leaving me to appreciate his writings at face value rather than because of their antiquity. With this perspective, when I read the Book of Mormon or Pearl of Great Price, I harbor the suspicion that they represent a 19th century encounter with God rather than an ancient epic. This is enlightening on a spiritual level but of no value in trying to learn more about ancient America or the Middle East. In the subsequent 3 chapters, I will explore what influences may have been at work as Joseph dictated the Book of Mormon. See Doctrine and Covenants 20-28, hereafter D&C, Joseph Smith, History. The Pearl of Great Price, 1, 33-35, 53, 59-62, hereafter J.S. History. These verses imply that Joseph needed the plates to translate. Joseph said that the title page of the Book of Mormon is a literal translation from the gold plates. Some have argued that since he said the plates read like Hebrew, from right to left, this implies that he used the plates while translating the Book of Mormon. Dean C. Jesse, Education. The Papers of Joseph Smith Autobiographical and Historical Writings, Salt Lake City Deseret Book Company, 1989, 1-300. Abraham wrote a book. Abraham instructed the men concerning which he wrote a book and left it to his son Isaac, in the same place. Having been myself a follower of righteousness they hearkened not unto my voice. Abraham. 1, 2, 7. The Book of Abraham, written by his own hand, heading, Compare Abraham. 1, 31. Adapted from Wesley P. Walters, Well-Known Jewish Legends About Abraham, photocopy in my possession, used by permission. Authorship of the Book of Mormon. One of the official publications of the Latter-day Saint Church is Elder James E. Talmage's The Articles of Faith. On the Book of Mormon, Elder Talmage advises this book is entitled to the most thorough and impartial examination. Not only does the Book of Mormon merit such consideration, it claims, even demands the same. Early 20th century Apostle John A. Whitsoe added, to Latter-day Saints there can be no objection to the careful and critical study of the Scriptures, ancient or modern, provided only that it be an honest study, a search for truth. Their contemporary, J. Reuben Clark, a counselor in the First Presidency, expressed the same attitude in a provocative epigram. He stated that if we have the truth, it cannot be harmed by investigation. If we have not the truth, it ought to be harmed. Thus the Church has encouraged a thorough and impartial examination of the Book of Mormon, including questions regarding its authorship. One of the most persistent beliefs regarding the Book of Mormon's authorship is that Joseph Smith was intellectually incapable of writing it. This invites an exploration of the creative mind and the secular and religious education of the prophet. Elder B. H. Roberts, President of the First Council of 70, conducted an extensive investigation in the early 1920s to determine if the 22-year-old Joseph was capable of writing the Book of Mormon. He determined that Joseph was uneducated but brilliant and that he exhibited a degree of genius. In fact, the distinguishing characteristic of Joseph's mind was a vivid, and strong, and creative imagination. Roberts continued that Joseph Smith possessed such a gift of mind there can be no question. He gives examples from Joseph's life to demonstrate this. Looking at the Book of Mormon, Roberts wrote, one detects a creative influence at work. For instance, where the Book of Mormon speaks of miracles, they seem reminiscent of those we read about in the Bible, only that they are more spectacular, surpassing the miracles of the Bible. Where there are wars, they are epic in scale. Roberts wondered if this is real history or if the accounts are meant to be read as inspirational tales. He wrote as an illustration of the amazingly miraculous events connected with Nephite wars. Reference is made to the performances of a corps of 2,000, ultimately 2,060, young men, striplings, who fought through what could appropriately be called the 13 Years' War, since it lasted that long, 73 BC to 60 BC. These striplings fought in many battles, yet none of them were killed. Often they saved the day at critical periods of battle, and though many of them were wounded, yet none were slain, to the amazement of both armies. On one occasion 200 of the 2,060 fainted because of loss of blood. Nevertheless, according to the goodness of God, not one soul of them did perish. Yea, and speaking of this same particular battle, neither was the one soul among them who had not received many wounds. Is it history? Roberts asked, or the product of a pious but immature mind? At the commencement of the 13 Years' War, 73 BC, the same scenario is described for the adult troops, Alma 49:23. After several extensive encounters with the enemy, the narrative records, more than 1,000 of the Lamanites were slain, while, on the other hand, there was not a single soul of the Nephites which was slain. Again, this seemed implausible to Roberts. There are also similarities in the histories of the two major civilizations within the Book of Mormon, the Nephites and Jaredites. Roberts wrote about the extreme fates these two civilizations faced and concluded, in all this war of extinction and destruction there is only one important variation, and that is that in the case of the Jaredites, the annihilation was complete for both sides down to the last man. In the case of the Nephites and Lamanites, only the Nephites were wholly annihilated. And now, I doubt not, at the conclusion of this review of the Nephite and Jaredite wars of extinction, both of which coincidentally centered around the same militarily insignificant hill in Joseph Smith's New York neighborhood, some will be led to exclaim, and I will set it down for them, is all this sober history inspired, written and true, representing things that actually happened? Or is it a wonder tale of an immature mind, unconscious of what a test he is laying on human credulity when asking men to accept his narrative as solemn history? When Joseph Smith was presented with a partial skeleton found in 1834, he declared that God had told him the man's name was Zelph and that he had been a godly white Lamanite. Zelph was killed, he said, while serving under Onondagas, a Nephite general who was known across North America. When shown the forged Kinderhook plates, Joseph reported that they contained the history of an ancient Jaredite whose genealogy extended back to Ham, son of Noah. Joseph also gave many other vivid descriptions of secular and spiritual heroes from the past and their treasures hidden in the hills of New York and Pennsylvania. Elder Roberts concluded that, given such examples, we should consider the possibility that it would have been within Joseph's reach to create a book such as the Book of Mormon is. Joseph's secular education began in 1812 when he was about 7 years old. His mother, Lucy, recalled as our children had, in a great measure, been debarred from the privilege of schools. We began to make every arrangement to attend to this important duty. We established our second son Hiram age 13 in an academy at Hanover, and the rest, that were of sufficient age, we were sending to a common school that was quite convenient. Sending Hiram to a private academy reveals how important education was to the Smith family. He eventually taught school in Manchester. By 1828 he was one of the trustees of the school and was responsible for hiring teachers. Lucy informs us that her husband, Joseph Smith Sr., was a school teacher, as well. William Smith wrote of his father, his occupation in early life was that of a school teacher. He was a man well lettered in the common branches of our English studies. This became important to Joseph Jr. when his parents began teaching school in their home in Manchester. John Stafford, a nearby neighbor and later surgeon, said Joe was quite illiterate. After they began to have school at their house, he improved greatly. They also studied the Bible. Because of Joseph Sr.'s education, as limited as it might have been by more elite, urban standards. Young Joseph nevertheless benefited from his father's interest in learning and from observations his father probably made on topics of the day. Joseph irregularly attended public schools. At age 20 he briefly returned to formal public schooling. Orson Pratt summarized Joseph's education: he could read without much difficulty, and write with a very imperfect hand, and had a very limited understanding of the ground rules of arithmetic. This describes what passed as schooling for most rural people in the 19th century. From the beginning, people tended to view Joseph as a bright but unschooled farm boy. Critics stressed his lack of formal education and poor spelling and penmanship. But spelling was not standardized until after Noah Webster's dictionary was published in 1828. And Joseph's penmanship was in fact quite good. Figure 15. Yet, from Eber D. Howe's 1834 Mormonism Unveiled to Fawn Brody's 1945 No Man Knows My History, the overwhelming belief was that he was incapable of writing the Book of Mormon and that someone must have written it for him. Within the church, the portrait of a bright but ignorant farm boy placed the Book of Mormon in a miraculous light. Thus we have an image of Joseph Smith as one not learned. See Isaiah 29:12. While this accurately describes his formal education, it misstates his knowledge of the Bible, of evangelical Protestantism, and of American antiquities. Within his environment, he wrote in his 1832 history that his parents were thorough in instructing me in the Christian religion and that, from age 12 on, he became a serious Bible student by searching the scriptures. John Reed, a friend of his, observed, I early discovered him often speaking of those things which professed Christians believe in. Joseph attended religious meetings in his youth, as often as occasion would permit, was awakened by Reverend George Lane's discourses on the scriptures, and became somewhat partial to the Methodist sect. Another early acquaintance remembered his participation in the Methodist Church, stating that Joseph became a very passable exhorter at the evening meetings and that he used to help us solve some portentous questions of moral or political ethics, in our juvenile debating club. Apostle Parley P. Pratt noted about Joseph's preaching that none listened to him that were ever weary with his discourse. Perhaps the most important statement of Joseph's religious education was written by himself in 1832. He related that during his formative years, he came to possess an intimate acquaintance with those of different denominations. While his formal education was not impressive, his knowledge of the religious opinion of the day was fairly extensive. Alexander Campbell, founder of the Disciples of Christ, thought he detected contemporary influences in the Book of Mormon when he wrote in February the 18th to the 31st that the book answered almost every issue that had been discussed in New York for the last 10 years. He decides all the great controversies: infant baptism, ordination, the Trinity, regeneration, repentance, justification, the fall of man, the atonement, transubstantiation, fasting, penance, church government, religious experience, the call to the ministry, the general resurrection, eternal punishment, who may baptize, and even the question of Freemasonry, republican government, and the rights of man. All these topics are repeatedly alluded to. In fact, the Book of Mormon reflects a keen awareness of evangelical Protestantism and the Bible. Joseph's familiarity with the King James Version before the Book of Mormon was dictated to Oliver Cowdery is clear when scrutinizing Joseph's second recorded revelation, given for his father in February the 18th to the 29th and printed as Book of Commandments 3, D and C4. This short revelation contains many Old and New Testament phrases, identified below by biblical references in brackets. The revelation reads now, "Behold, a marvelous work, Isaiah 29:14, is about to come forth among the children of men." Ps. 12:1, "Therefore, O ye that embark in the service of God." Ezra 6:18, "See that ye serve him with all your heart." Deuteronomy 11:13, "Might, mind and strength." Luke 10:27, "That ye may stand blameless before God at the last day. Therefore, if ye have desires to serve God, ye are called to the work, for behold, the field is white already to harvest." John 4:35, "And lo, he that thrusteth in his sickle." Revelations 14:16, "With his might, the same layeth up in store 1 Timothy 6:19 that he perish not Jonah 1:6, but bringeth salvation to his soul, and faith, hope, charity 1 Corinthians 13:13 and love, with an eye single to the glory of God, qualifies him for the work. Remember temperance, patience, humility, diligence 2 Peter 1:5-6, and, ask and ye shall receive John 16:24, knock and it shall be opened unto you Matthew 7:7. Amen. In the Doctrine and Covenants we learn that the language Joseph Smith used in dictating revelations was his own. 1-24. He learned biblical language in his youth and seems to have applied it in these situations. Other people of that era knew the Bible equally well. Pomeroy Tucker, who was acquainted with Martin Harris and seemed to like him, said Harris could repeat from memory nearly every text of the Bible from beginning to end, giving the chapter and verse in each case. LDS Apostle Orson Hyde claimed similar abilities. As a young man he memorized the Bible, and when anyone quoted one verse, I could quote the next. I have memorized it in English, German, and Hebrew. Some writers suggest that Elizabethan English was commonly used in Joseph Smith's community and that he absorbed it as he grew up. But there is no supporting evidence for this. Letters from Joseph to Oliver Cowdery in 1829 and to his wife Emma, and others do not reveal that he used biblical phrasing in daily life. Here is a plausible example of how Joseph may have used his biblical knowledge. The story of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead in John 11 arguably serves as a source for Alma 19. Note the common phrases, which I have placed in italics, and the 7 common motifs in both stories. In Alma, about 90 BC, Lamoni is dying and his wife sent and desired that Ammon should come, and some say he stinketh. He is not dead, Ammon said, but sleepeth, and he shall rise again. Ammon said unto her, Believest thou this? And she said unto him, I believe, and he arose. Alma 19:2, 5, 8, 9, 12. Lazarus, in about AD 33, is dying, and his sisters sent unto him. Jesus saith, This sickness is not unto death, for Lazarus sleepeth. Then Jesus saith unto her, Thy brother shall rise again. Jesus said unto her, Believest thou this? She saith unto him, Yea, Lord, I believe, but by this time he stinketh. Jesus spoke, and he that was dead came forth. John 11:3-4, 11, 23, 26, 27, 39, 44. The phrase he stinketh appears once in the Bible and once in the Book of Mormon. The words he stinketh and sleepeth are found together only in these 2 chapters. The 7-word phrase Believest thou this? She saith unto him appears only in John and Alma. Within the story of Lazarus we can see potential evidence of a thorough knowledge of the Bible. The identifying and unique phrases of the Lazarus story appear with slight modifications in Alma. In the flow of this dictated narrative, the names of Ammon, the queen, and Lamoni are integrated into this language pattern. Beginning in Alma 19:12, the narrative moves to another form that is recognizable from Joseph's intellectual environment, in this case borrowing wording and Matthew 13:3-8, Alma 32:28-43. A sower went forth to sow. 3. The seed is the word of God. Luke 8:11. Some seeds fell by the wayside. 4. Some sprung up. 5. But when the sun was up, some were scorched, and because they had no root, they withered away. 6. But some brought forth fruit. 8. Now, we will compare the word unto a seed. 28. If ye do not cast it out by your unbelief. 28. It sprouteth up. 29:36. But when the heat of the sun cometh, it scorcheth it, because it hath no root, and it withers away. 37:40. But some seeds bring forth fruit. 41:43. Themes from the Protestant evangelical conversion experience that was common to the early 19th century. This intermixing of evangelical phrases and themes into a complicated plot is impressive and will be examined in more detail in Chapter 4. Another example of a biblical story that is expanded in the Book of Mormon is Alma 32, where Jesus' parable of the sower, Matthew 13, serves as a source of language. Both of these narratives compare the word of God to a seed. Motifs are developed in the same chronological order in both chapters and in no others. suggesting dependency of one on the other. A unique commentary appears in the Book of Mormon between the Matthean motifs 28. Joseph said the Book of Mormon was translated by the gift and power of God, coming forth out of the treasure of the heart, thus bringing forth out of the heart things new and old. The evidence indicates that the Book of Mormon is in fact an amalgamation of ideas that were inspired by Joseph's own environment, new, and themes from the Bible, old. Quite a number of things old appear in the Book of Mormon. The story of Alma the Younger seems to draw from the New Testament story of the Apostle Paul as a model. Consider the following comparisons: Hebrews 3, 7:13, Alma 12, 33-36. The Holy Ghost saith, Today if ye will hear his voice. 7. Harden not your hearts, as in the provocation. 8. So I swear in my wrath, they shall not enter into my rest. 11. Take heed, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart. But God did call on men, saying, If ye will repent, and harden not your hearts. 33. Behold, I swear in my wrath that he shall not enter into my rest. 35. And now, my brethren, if ye will harden your hearts, ye shall not enter. 1. Both men were wicked before their dramatic conversion. Mosiah 27:8, 1 Timothy 1, 12-13. Both traveled about persecuting and seeking to destroy the Church of God. Alma 36:6, 14, 1 Corinthians 15:9, Acts 22:4. Both were persecuting the church when they saw a heavenly vision. Mosiah 27:10-11, Acts 26:11-13. Their companions fell to the earth and were unable to understand the voice that spoke. Mosiah 27:12, Acts 22:9, 26:14. Both were asked in vision why they persecuted the Lord. Mosiah 27:13, Acts 9:4, 22:7. Both were struck dumb blind, became helpless, and were assisted by their companions. They went without food before converting. Mosiah 27:19, 23:24, Acts 9:8-9, 18. Both preached the gospel and both performed the same miracle. Mosiah 27:32, Alma 15:11, Acts 9:20, 14:10. While preaching, they supported themselves by their own labors. Alma 30:32, 1 Corinthians 4:12. They were put in prison. After they prayed, an earthquake resulted in their bands being loosed. Alma 14:22, 26:28, Acts 16:23, 25:26. Both used the same phrases in their preaching. To expand on point number 10, much of the language of Alma the Younger's speech in Alma 12:13 is reminiscent of Hebrews 3:4, as the following comparisons demonstrate of unbelief but exhort one another daily, while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened. 12:13, into the rest of the Lord. Therefore your iniquity provoketh him that he sendeth down his wrath upon you as in the first provocation. 36, Hebrews 3:15-18, Alma 12:37. Today if ye will hear his voice, harden not your hearts, as in the provocation. For some, when they had heard, did provoke. 15:16. That they should not enter into his rest. 18. And now, my brethren, let us harden not our hearts, that we provoke not the Lord our God to pull down his wrath upon us, but let us enter into the rest of God. 37, Hebrews 7:1-4, Alma 13:7, 15, 17-19. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, 1, to whom also Abraham gave a tenth part of all, first being by interpretation king of righteousness, and after that also king of Salem, which is, king of peace. 2, without father, without mother, without descent, having neither beginning of. Now this Melchizedek was a king over the land of Salem, and received the office of the high priesthood of God. 17:18. To whom Abraham paid tithes, yea, 1/10 part of all. Melchizedek was called the Prince of Peace, for he was the king of Salem, and he did reign under his father. None. In the next verse, the same point-for-point sequence is again repeated. These motifs are present elsewhere in Hebrews 3:4 and Alma 12:13. They seem to indicate some borrowing from Paul's discourse. For Alma's speech in chapter 13, the biography of Melchizedek, in Hebrews 7 appears to be an influence 32 days, nor end of life, but made like unto the Son of God, abideth a priest continually. 3. Now consider how great this man was. 4. Were greater. 15, 18, 19. This high priesthood being after the order of his Son, being without beginning of days or end of years, being prepared from eternity to all eternity. 7. Paul on faith, Moroni on faith. 1. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. 1. Faith is things which are hoped for and not seen, wherefore, dispute not because ye see not. 6. 2. The following list of biblical characters demonstrated faith in God: Abel, Abraham, Barak, David, Enoch, Gideon, Isaac, Jacob, Jephthah, Joseph, Moses, Noah, Rahab, Samson, Samuel, Sarah, the Israelites at Jericho, and the prophets. 3:33, 2. The following list of Book of Mormon characters showed faith in Christ: Alma, Ammon, Amalek, Jared's brother, Jesus' disciples, Lehi, Moroni's ancestors, Nephi, other Nephites, the 3 Nephites, they of old, and those who received the law of Moses. 7:31, 3. Who through faith obtained promises. 33, 3. And it is by faith that my fathers have obtained the promise. 22:34. We know that Paul's life, phrasing, and motifs form a powerful and popular narrative in the New Testament, along with Paul's impressive style. Notice the sequence of ideas in Hebrews 11 in comparison with Ether 12:33-34. Paul's writings continue to influence this section of Ether, where Paul on hope, Moroni on hope. 1. Jesus made a surety of a better testament. Hebrews 7:22, 1. In God we might with surety hope for a better world. 2. Which hope we have is an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast. Hebrews 6:19, 2. Which hope maketh an anchor to the souls of men, which would make them sure and steadfast. 3. A place which he should after receive for an inheritance. Hebrew 11:8, 3. Wherefore man must hope, or he cannot receive an inheritance in the place. Ether 12:4. Paul on charity, Moroni on charity. If I have not charity, I am nothing. Charity suffereth long, and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, doth not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth, beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Charity never faileth. 1 Corinthians 13:2, 4, 8. If he have not charity, he is nothing. Charity suffereth long, and is kind, and envieth not, and is not puffed up, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, and rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth, beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Charity never faileth. Moroni 7:44-46. Moroni delivers a sermon on faith, hope and charity. 12:28, a phrase found in Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. 13:3. The influence of Paul's writings continue up through the closing chapter of the Book of Mormon. 1 Corinthians 12, Moroni 10. There are diversities of gifts, but the same Spirit. And there are differences of administrations, but it is the same God which worketh all in all. But the manifestation of the Spirit is given to every man to profit withal. For to one is given by the Spirit the word of wisdom, to another the word of knowledge by the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit, to another the gifts of healing by the same Spirit, to another the working of miracles, to another prophecy, to another discerning spirits, to another divers kinds of tongues, to another the interpretation of tongues. But all these come to every man severally as he will. 4:11. The gifts of God are many, and they come from the same God. And there are different ways that these gifts are administered, but it is the same God who worketh all in all, and they are given by the manifestations of the Spirit of God unto men, to profit them. For behold, to one is given by the Spirit the word of wisdom, and to another, the word of knowledge by the same Spirit, and to another, exceeding great faith, and to another, the gifts of healing by the same Spirit, and again, to another, that he may work mighty miracles, and again, to another, that he may prophesy, to another ministering spirits, to another, the interpretation of languages and of divers kinds of tongues. And all these gifts come unto every man severally, according as he will. 8:17. We may assume that God reveals similar concepts to different people at different times, and that such similarities in theme are to be expected. The lingering question is whether such concepts could be expected to be found in identical sequences of ideas, phrases, and sentences. Consider the story of Judith in the Apocrypha compared to the decapitation of Laban in the Book of Mormon. 1. In this story Judith, Nephi are servants of God. They encounter Holofernes Laban, who wants to destroy God's people. Judith 7:1, 8:7, 1 Nephi 3:25. Interestingly, Laban is a name that appears in Judith's narrative, 8:26. 2. Judith, Nephi leave enter the city secretly by night. They find Holofernes Laban upon the bedground, asleep and drunk with wine. Judith 13:2, 1 Nephi 4:4-5. 7. 3. Both take Holofernes Laban by the hair and with his own sword cut off his head. Judith 13:6-8, 1 Nephi 4:9, 18. 4. Judith Nephi then takes some of Holofernes Laban's possessions. When they rejoin their people, there is great rejoicing in their success. Judith 13:12, 14:9, 15:11, 1 Nephi 4:19, 38, 5:9, 5. Both groups celebrate by offering burnt offerings to the Lord. Judith 16:18, 1 Nephi 5:9. Elsewhere in the Book of Mormon, one wonders if the 12 apostles of Jesus could be the model for the Nephite 12 disciples. For instance, the New Testament apostles include men with 3 duplicate sets of names: Simon Peter, Simon the Canaanite, James the son of Alphaeus, James the son of Zebedee, Judas the brother of James, and Judas Iscariot. Luke the 13th of June 2016, Matthew 10:24, Mark the 16th of March 2019, 1:13. The American 12 similarly include 3 sets of duplicate names: 2 men named Jonas, 2 named Mathoni and Mathonah, and 2 named Cuman and Cumani. See 3 Nephi 19:4. The Old World 12 include 3 sets of brothers: Andrew and Simon, James and John, and Judas and James. Among the American 12 are 2 sets of brothers and a father and son: Mathoni and Mathonah, Nephi and Timothy's son Jonas. These parallels suggest a close relationship with the New Testament text. In Chapter 3, I will further examine themes in 3 Nephi. For now, let us turn our attention to the American antiquities that formed such an immediate and compelling topic of study and discussion in young Joseph's environment. Dan Vogel's Indian Origins and the Book of Mormon demonstrates how extensively ideas concerning American antiquities were discussed in Joseph's era, and how relevant these 19th century views are to the Book of Mormon. For example, the most popular notion at the time was that Native Americans descended from Israelites. Genetically, it is now accepted that Indians are of Siberian and Mongolian extraction and that they migrated from Asia across the Bering Strait. Besides sharing distinctive genes, the corresponding morphological similarities are striking. The characteristic eye fold, the pigmented spot which appears at the base of the spine of infants, and the shovel shape of the incisor. These traits have been found in varying proportions among every Indian group studied. During the last 10 years, scientists from various research organizations, including biologists from Brigham Young University, have tested the DNA of over 7,000 American Indians. These tests cover about 130 tribes scattered throughout North, Central, and South America. This research has revealed that in excess of 99% of the ancestors of living Native American women arrived on the American continent from Asia over 12,000 years ago. About 90% of the men have Y chromosome DNA from the same place of origin. Lesser DNA lineages originate in Africa or Europe, most likely Spain, but not from the Middle East. The LDS position that Israelites are the principal ancestors of the American Indians is no longer probable, even if a possibility still exists for the yet uncharted 1 to 2% of Indian DNA. In addition, there is no evidence that ancient Americans practiced Hebrew or Christian rituals or held corresponding beliefs. No clearly identified Hebrew or Egyptian writing has been discovered in the New World dating before Columbus. Furthermore, linguists have determined from historical patterns the rate at which languages evolve. Given that rate, the Book of Mormon provides far too short a time, 1400 years, for the complete disappearance of the Nephite-Lamanite language. No indigenous American language has a demonstrable Hebraic or Egyptian origin. If these non-Hebrew characteristics, genetic, biological, historical, and linguistic traits, are so prevalent, where and why did the idea of a Hebrew origin develop, and what implications does this hold for the Book of Mormon? The tradition of appropriating biblical themes and imagery and applying them to America began with the Puritans. In the Bible, the Puritans found a view of themselves not as refugees but as partners with God on an errand in the wilderness to build the Latter-day Church of God, the New Jerusalem on Mount Zion. In Joseph Smith's day, this trend continued. Far from being a slight, it was considered a high compliment and an act of inclusiveness to number Native Americans among the holy remnants of God's chosen people. By borrowing biblical metaphor, the people of Joseph's day interpreted the world around them and expressed their ideals and aspirations. They saw themselves as inheritors, by adoption, of God's prophetic promises, just like the Puritans who believed that in America, God hath discovered new things unto his anointed. Among the things new that Joseph Smith brought to his interpretation of the Bible was the view, already popular in 19th century publications, that American Indians were of Israelite or Hebrew origins. One of these publications was Reverend Ethan Smith's 1823 view of the Hebrews, Figure 16. Among those who have seen this book as an inspiration for some of the basic structural material on which the Book of Mormon hangs is Church Authority B. H. Roberts. Elder Roberts recognized the utility of having a ground plan to work from to contextualize theological issues, and he therefore decided to investigate the possible connection between the two books. He concluded that there was a great probability that the Smith family had read or possessed a knowledge of view of the Hebrews. The book was written, published, and widely distributed in New England and New York, where the Smith family lived, 2 editions rapidly selling out. Roberts believed that if the Smiths did not purchase a copy, it could easily have been supplied by Oliver Cowdery, Smith's cousin and scribe. Cowdery lived in the same small town as the author, Reverend Smith, who was the Cowdery family's Congregationalist pastor from 1821 to 1826. Roberts believed that if Joseph Smith's family had not read the volume, they would have had a good knowledge of its contents because of the intense and widespread public interest in Indian origins, customs, religion, traditions, and antiquities. Ethan Smith gathered ideas and materials on these subjects from over 40 knowledgeable authorities and wove them into a narrative. The book's popularity was so widespread that its contents would have been common knowledge, discussed at informal gatherings where people met to talk. There is no direct connection between View of the Hebrews and the Book of Mormon. View of the Hebrews represents a body of 19th century thought and is not an early version of the Book of Mormon. But the parallels between the two books are instructive in understanding the environment in which the Book of Mormon emerged. Below are several of Roberts's summaries from his extensive study of Ethan Smith's book. Figure 17. Israelites in Ancient America. View of the Hebrews not only suggests, but pleads on every page for Israelitish origins of the American Indians. It deals with the destruction of Jerusalem and the scattering of Israel, as the Book of Mormon does. It deals with the future gathering of Israel, and the restoration of the 10 tribes, as the Book of Mormon does. It emphasizes and uses much of the material from the prophecies of Isaiah, including whole chapters, as the Book of Mormon does. It makes a special appeal to the Gentiles of the New World, having in mind more especially the people of the United States, to become the nursing fathers and mothers unto Israel in the New World, even as the Book of Mormon does, holding out great promises to the great Gentile nation that shall occupy America. if it acquiesces in the divine program. Studies. 240. Migrations to Ancient America. View of the Hebrews holds that the peopling of the New World was by migrations from the Old, the same as does the Book of Mormon. It takes its migrating people into a country where never man dwelt, just as the Book of Mormon takes its Jaredite colony into that quarter where there never had man been. In both cases the journey was to the northward. In both cases the colony entered into the valley of a great river. They both encountered seas of many waters in the course of their journey. In both cases the journey was a long one. The motive in both cases was the same, a religious one. Ethan is prominently connected with the recording of the matter in the one case, and ether in the other. 240-41. Two classes of people. Ethan Smith's book supposes that his lost tribes divide into two classes, the one fostering the arts that make for civilization, the other followed the wild hunting and indolent life that ultimately led to barbarism, which is just what happens to the Book of Mormon peoples. Long and dismal wars break out between Ethan Smith's civilized division and his barbarous division. The same occurs between Nephite and Lamanite, divisions drawn on the same lines of civilized and barbarous in the Book of Mormon. The savage division utterly exterminates the civilized in Ethan Smith's book. The Lamanites, the barbarous division of the Book of Mormon, utterly destroy the civilized division, the Nephites. Ethan Smith's book assumes for the ancient civilized people a culture of mechanic arts, of written language, of the knowledge and use of iron and other metals, and of navigation. The Book of Mormon does the same for its civilized peoples. 241. One race. Ethan Smith's book assumes unity of race for the inhabitants of America, the Hebrew race, and no other. The Book of Mormon does the same for its civilized people. Ethan Smith's book assumes that this race, save perhaps the Eskimo of the extreme north, occupied the whole extent of the American continents. The Book of Mormon does the same for its peoples. It assumes the Indian tongue to have had one source, the Hebrew. The Book of Mormon makes the same assumption for the language of its peoples. 241. Urim and Thummim and a Lost Book. Ethan Smith's book describes an instrument among the mound finds comprising a breastplate with two white buckhorn buttons attached, in imitation of the precious stones of the Urim, says Ethan Smith. Joseph Smith used some such instrument in translating the Book of Mormon, called Urim and Thummim. Ethan Smith's book admits the existence of idolatry and human sacrifice. The Book of Mormon does the same. Ethan Smith's book extols generosity to the poor and denounces pride, as traits of the American Indian. The Book of Mormon does the same for its peoples. Ethan Smith's book denounces polygamy. The Book of Mormon under certain conditions does the same as to David and Solomon's practices. Ethan Smith's book quotes Indian traditions of a lost book of God and the promise of its restoration to the Indians, with a return of their lost favor with the Great Spirit. This is in keeping with the lost sacred records to the savage Lamanites of the Book of Mormon. Ethan Smith's sacred book was buried with some high priest, keeper of the sacred tradition. The Book of Mormon sacred records were hidden or buried by Moroni, a character that corresponds to this Indian tradition in the hill Qumran. 241-42. Military fortifications. Ethan Smith's book describes extensive military fortifications linking cities together over wide areas of Ohio and Mississippi valleys, with military observatory or watchtowers overlooking them. The Book of Mormon describes extensive fortifications erected throughout large areas with military watchtowers here and there overlooking them. Ethan Smith's book also describes sacred towers or high places, in some instances devoted to true worship, in other cases to idolatrous practices. The Book of Mormon also has its prayer or sacred towers. 242. Government. Part of Ethan Smith's ancient inhabitants affect a change from monarchical governments to republican forms of government. Book of Mormon peoples do the same. In Ethan Smith's republics the civil and ecclesiastical power is united in the same person. This was a practice also with the Book of Mormon people. Some of Ethan Smith's peoples believed in the constant struggle between the good and the bad principle, by which the world is governed. Lehi, first of the Nephite prophets, taught the existence of a necessary opposition in all things, righteousness opposed to wickedness, good to bad, life to death, and so following. 242. The Gospel and a Christ Type. Ethan Smith's book speaks of the gospel having been preached in the ancient America. The Book of Mormon clearly portrays a knowledge of the gospel had among the Nephites. Ethan Smith gives, in considerable detail, the story of the Mexican culture hero Quetzalcoatl, who in so many things is reminiscent of the Christ. The Book of Mormon brings the risen Messiah to the New World, gives him a ministry, disciples and a church. 242. In short, according to President Roberts, the Book of Mormon's view of American antiquities is in harmony with the thinking that was prevalent in Joseph Smith's environment. Archaeological discoveries of the day presented an ideal backdrop for explaining a lost trace of people. The Book of Mormon also demonstrated an understanding of the Bible and of evangelical Protestantism. It is important to understand the impulse behind the Book of Mormon's creation. We know from his 1832 history that Joseph Smith had an unusual concern about sin in the 1820s. I discovered that the Christians did not adorn their profession by a holy walk and godly conversation agreeable to what I found contained in that sacred depository, the Bible. This was a grief to my soul because of the wickedness and abominations and the darkness which pervaded the minds of mankind. My mind became exceedingly distressed. His spiritual angst is further seen in a letter to Emma in 1832. This day I have been walking through the most splendid part of the city of New York. Their iniquities shall be visited upon their heads, and their works shall be burned up with unquenchable fire. The iniquity of the people is printed in every countenance, and nothing but the dress of the people makes them look fair and beautiful. All is deformity. There is something in every countenance that is disagreeable. With few exceptions, after beholding all that I had any desire to behold, I returned to my room to meditate and calm my mind. What Joseph perceived as wickedness and spiritual alienation caused him deep distress. The Book of Mormon would help remedy the agnosticism and confusion that people of the day felt over religion, as found on the Book of Mormon's title page. It was intended to convince Jew and Gentile that Jesus is the Christ. It was to promote piety by enhancing belief in the Bible. Mormon 7:9 states explicitly, "For behold, this is written for the intent that ye may believe the Bible." The Book of Mormon called a hypocritical Christian world to repentance, and perhaps more than any other volume except the Bible, it successfully motivated people to confront their sins and come to Christ. The Book of Mormon also unified Joseph's immediate family, religiously and otherwise, including some projected economic consequences. During the 1824-25 Palmyra revival, the Smith family had become divided. Mother Lucy pleaded with her husband, but he refused to attend church after 2 or 3 meetings. Joseph Jr. said he wept when he baptized his parents in April 1830 and thereby reunited the family. He later told his brother William, "I brought salvation to my father's house, as an instrument in the hands of God, when they were in a miserable situation." Economically, the family was in dire straits. Lucy said that when Joseph brought the plates home in September the 18th to the 27th, there was not a shilling in the house. Hiram Page wrote in 1848 that he, Oliver Cowdery, Joseph Knight Sr., and Josiah Stowell received a revelation from Joseph Smith in 1829-30 to go to Canada and sell the copyright of the Book of Mormon for $8,000. After expenses, the money was to go to the Smith family. The men tried but failed. The following is a plausible scenario for how the Book of Mormon came to be. After Joseph's marriage to Emma Hale in January 1827, he promised his father-in-law that he would give up treasure hunting. Influenced by the revival fervor and by his mother's piety, his mind began to fill with impressions that blended his familiarity with Indian law and his conviction of biblical promises. Perhaps the outline of a book began to form sometime before Martin Harris became his scribe in April 1828. He had already experimented with seer stones, and perhaps he thought that through greater faith and concentration, God would open to his mind a vision of the secrets of the artifacts being discovered in upstate New York. The dictation proceeded, and after Martin lost the first 116 pages of transcription in mid-1828, this may have been fortuitous. An apprenticeship had been served, and the vision that was unfolding in Joseph's mind may have become more clear. The dictation probably progressed haltingly at first, perhaps as a kind of stream of consciousness narrative. Before Oliver Cowdery became his new scribe in April 1829, the prophet had had 9 months to ponder the details of the plots and subplots and to flesh out the timeline. Given his familiarity with the Bible and with American antiquities, it would have become progressively easier for him to put form to the vision. He dictated the final manuscript in about 90 days. Over the next 8 months, before the book was published in March the 18th to the 30th, he had the opportunity to make textual refinements. He thus had 3 years to develop, write, and refine the book, 6 years from the time he told his family about the project. The next 2 chapters will continue to explore Joseph's blending of things new and old into a syncretic whole, with emphasis on his interpretation of the Bible as it impacted the theology and prose of the Book of Mormon. While the New Testament texts are concise, the Book of Mormon, as a dictated text, is wordy and often redundant, as observed in Alma 32. Sometimes the same speech, with almost identical wording, is repeated, as in the speeches of Ammon and Aaron before their respective kings in Alma 18, 24:42 and Alma 22, 7:18. The Bible in the Book of Mormon. Krista Stendhal, at the time dean of the Harvard Divinity School, wrote of the Bible's influence on the Book of Mormon. The biblical material behind the Book of Mormon strikes me as being in the form of the KJV King James Version. I have applied standard methods of historical critics, redaction criticism, and genre criticism. From such perspectives it seems very clear that the Book of Mormon belongs to and shows many of the typical signs of the Targum's interpretations or paraphrasings and the pseudepigraphic recasting of biblical material. The Targumic tendencies are those of clarifying and actualizing translations, usually by expansion and the more specific application to the need and situation of the community. The pseudepigraphic, both apocalyptic and didactic, tend to fill out the gaps in our knowledge about sacred events, truths, and predictions. It is obvious to me that the Book of Mormon stands within both of these traditions if considered as a phenomenon of religious texts. The following 5 examples exemplify Stendhal's observations. Main characters. The most important books within the Book of Mormon are arguably 1, 2, and 3 Nephi, because they prophesy about and record the fulfilled promises of Christ's coming. Hints of biblical models appear in these books, including even the name Nephi. Interwoven among this material is a narrative in 1st and 2nd Nephi seemingly identifying Lehi and Nephi, the 2 principal figures in these 2 books, with aspects of the lives of Joseph Smith Sr. and Joseph Smith Jr. Lehi also seems to have characteristics of Jacob of old, while in Nephi's persona we can detect echoes of Joseph of Egypt and the Moses. For example, Joseph Sr. had a dream in 1811, recalled by his wife as his first vision, which is remarkably similar to Lehi's first vision in 1st Nephi. In these visions, both Lehi and Joseph Sr. are visited by a personage who provides them with a box or book, the contents of which enables them to understand God's salvation. They are jubilant at first but soon encounter opposition and flee for their lives. They both awake from their vision trembling. Lehi's dream about the tree of life is strikingly similar to another of Joseph Sr.'s 1811 dreams. The elder Smith said, "I was traveling in an open, desolate field. My guide said, 'This is the desolate world.' I came to a narrow path. I beheld a beautiful stream of water. I could see a rope running along the bank of it. I saw a tree such as I had never seen before. It was exceedingly handsome. Its beautiful branches bore a kind of fruit as white as snow. I drew near and began to eat of it, and I found it delicious beyond description and thought that I must bring my wife and children, that they may partake with me. Accordingly, I brought my family and we all commenced eating. We were exceedingly happy, insomuch that our joy could not easily be expressed. While thus engaged, I beheld a spacious building that appeared to reach to the very heavens. It was full of people, who were very finely dressed. They pointed the finger of scorn at us, but their contumely arrogance we utterly disregarded in preference to the fruit that was so delicious. He, the guide, told me it was the pure love of God, shed abroad in the hearts of all those who love him. Look yonder, he said, you have 2 more children, and you must bring them also. I asked my guide what was the meaning of the spacious building which I saw. He replied, it is Babylon, and it must fall. In comparing this dream of Joseph Sr. to Lehi's dream in the Book of Mormon, I detect 25 similar motifs and much the same phrasing. Possibly, there is some cross-pollination between Joseph Sr.'s dream and his wife Lucy's telling of it on the one hand and Lehi's dream on the other, since Lucy wrote her autobiography after the Book of Mormon was published. But Lucy's memory is accurate in other areas, and I assume that it is at least as accurate in this case. Lehi's dream in the Book of Mormon reads as follows: A man bade me follow him. I had traveled for the space of many hours. I beheld a large and spacious field. I beheld a tree, whose fruit was desirable to make one happy. I did go forth and partake of the fruit which was most sweet, above all that I ever tasted. Yea, I beheld that the fruit thereof was white. It filled my soul with exceedingly great joy, wherefore, I began to be desirous that my family should partake of it also. I beheld a river of water, and they his family did come unto me and partake of the fruit also. And I saw them sons Laman and Lemuel, but they would not come unto me and partake of the fruit. I beheld a rod of iron, and it extended along the bank of the river. I also beheld a straight and narrow path and a large and spacious field, as if it had been a world. I saw a great and spacious building, and it stood as it were in the air, high above the earth. And it was filled with people, and their manner of dress was exceedingly fine. They did point the finger of scorn at me and those that were partaking of the fruit also, but we heeded them not. 1 Nephi 8, 5, 6, 9, 13, 16, 20, 26, 27, 33. The narrator in 1 Nephi refers often to his father. These are the words of my father, 8:34, and all these things did my father see, and hear, and speak. 9:1. I must speak somewhat of the things of my father. 10:1. In chapter 11, another reference is made to his father's dreams. And the Spirit said unto me, Behold, what desirest thou? And I said, I desire to behold the things which my father saw. The Spirit said unto me, Look. And I looked and beheld a tree, and it was like unto the tree which my father had seen, and the beauty thereof was far beyond, yea, exceeding of all beauty, and the whiteness thereof did exceed the whiteness of the driven snow. An angel said, Knowest thou the meaning of the tree which thy father saw? It is the love of God, which sheddeth itself abroad in the hearts of the children of men. And the multitude of the earth were in a large and spacious building, and it fell, and the fall thereof was exceedingly great. 2, 3, 8, 21, 22, 35, 36. These opening chapters of the Book of Mormon provide an example of how things new and old combine to provide a new meaning for a new audience. In the verses cited above, between these motifs, the narrator quotes passages from the KJV about the coming ministry of Jesus Christ. If Lucy was overly influenced by Lehi's Tree of Life dream in remembering her husband's dreams, this would be an exception to other, numerous parallels between Lehi and Joseph Sr. Both Lehi and Joseph Sr. consider their dreams to be divinely inspired, and they both report that they had many dreams. Both Lehi and Joseph Sr. had 6 sons, 2 with the same names, Sam and Joseph. The 4th son in each case eventually assumed family leadership from his father. The chosen sons, like their fathers, were more visionary than others in the family. They were seemingly favored by their fathers. Furthermore, both sons are large in stature, better speakers than writers, afflicted by much suffering, and favored of God. Both have difficulty procuring metal plates. They both make a record of their own life and include at the beginning that they were born of goodly parents. The lamentation in 2 Nephi 4, 1735 fits well the lives of these 2 sons of Joseph Sr. and Lehi. One difference is the hatred that Nephi's older brothers harbor towards him. Joseph's older brothers were supportive of him throughout their lives. But this motif identifies Nephi with Joseph of Egypt. Both have jealous, revengeful older brothers who want to kill them in the wilderness because of their visions and their claims to family leadership. Both Nephi and Joseph of Egypt are liberated in the end, their brothers eventually bowing to them and seeking their forgiveness, which they graciously grant. An aspect of Book of Mormon characters in general, also evident here, is that they do not strike most readers as three-dimensional. Morally, their views are black or white, and the idealized portrait of Nephi in particular lacks the complexities, weaknesses, and development over time of the Old and New Testament prophets. He does not have the normal number of blemishes or warts. In other words, even though Nephi claims to have imperfections, the text reveals him to be near perfect and altogether larger than life. Journey to a Promised Land. Stendhal's conclusion that the Book of Mormon recasts biblical material is best seen in the beginning of the book, the wilderness journey of Lehi's family to a promised land. This closely parallels 10 chapters in Exodus, as the following 20 chronological motifs illustrate. It is remarkable that many of the Nephite ideas and events occur at the same point in the chronology and at similar places as in the Israelite wilderness experience. These 20 shared motifs suggest dependency on the Bible Exodus story, prophecy in 1st and 2nd Nephi. The second major focus in 1st Nephi is prophecy. It begins within the wilderness journey and continues through 2nd Nephi, the primary sources being Isaiah and the 4 Gospels. The Isaiah prophecies occupy 2 chapters in 1st Nephi and half of 2nd Nephi. The major themes are, 1. The coming and ministry of Christ, 2. The scattering of Israel and the eschatological events surrounding Israel's gathering, and 3. Judgment upon the wicked and the millennial era of peace for the righteous. With hindsight, the Book of Mormon provides commentary upon these prophetic Isaiah themes by clarifying by expansion and filling out the gaps in our knowledge about sacred events, truths and predictions, a process which fits Stendhal's description of Targumic and pseudepigraphic literature. Like Isaiah, Nephi and Jacob in the Book of Mormon have seen the Savior. Wherefore, by the words of 3, God hath said, I will establish my word. My soul delighteth in proving unto my people the truth of the coming of Christ. 2 Nephi 11, 2-4. As Nephi and Jacob see the same prophecies as Isaiah, the narrator can add this further proof to convince a skeptical world. The prophecies of Nephi, Jacob, and others throughout the Book of Mormon are remarkable for their specificity. They are unmistakable, unconditional, and manifest boldness and certainty, specifying names, dates, places, and precise sequences of recognizable events down to Joseph Smith's own time. Moreover, they read more like history than prophecy. For example, the prophecies of the coming and ministry of Christ are written in the precise language of their fulfillment as found in the New Testament. In contrast, predictions of events beyond 1830, when the Book of Mormon was published, are vague, conditional, and subject to a variety of interpretation. Jesus' birth and baptism. It is said that in ancient America the birth of the Messiah was known to the very year, even 600 years prior to the event, that his name would be Jesus Christ, 2 Nephi 25:19, Luke 1:31, and that his mother, Mary, would live in Nazareth, 1 Nephi 11:13, Luke 1:26. Mary, it is said, would be a virgin, a precious and chosen vessel, who shall be overshadowed and conceive by the power of the Holy Ghost, and bring forth a son, yea, even the Son of God. Alma 7:10, Luke 1:27-28. 35. Information concerning Jesus' baptism by John the Baptist borrows from the Gospel authors. For there standeth one among you who ye know not, and he is mightier than I, whose shoes latch I am not worthy to unloose. He should baptize Jesus in Bethabara, beyond Jordan with water, the Lamb of God, who should take away the sins of the world. And ye shall bear record that it is the Son of God. 1 Nephi 10:8-10, 11:7, John 1:26-29. 34, Matthew 3:11. Jesus was to be baptized to fulfill all righteousness, and then the Holy Ghost descended upon him in the form of a dove. 2 Nephi 31:5-8. Matthew. The 15th of March 2016, Luke 3:22. Coming unto Jesus, salvation comes through faith, indeed, through faith on his name. Mosiah 3:9, Acts 3:16. Jesus is the straightness of the path, and the narrowness of the gate, by which they should enter. To those who follow him cometh the baptism of fire and of the Holy Ghost. For those who reject him, it would be better for you that ye had not known me. But he that endureth to the end, the same shall be saved. There is none other way nor name given under heaven whereby man can be saved. 2 Nephi 31:9, 13:15, 21. Matthew. The 13th of July 2014, John 21:22. Matthew. 3:11, 2 Peter 2:21, Matthew 24:13, Acts 4:12. Jesus' ministry, death, and resurrection. Of Christ's ministry, it is prophesied that despite his good works, many will say he has a devil, Mosiah 3:9, John 8:48, that he will heal multitudes of people who were sick, and who were afflicted with all manner of diseases, and with devils. And about the 12 apostles of the Lamb, behold, they are they who shall judge the 12 tribes of Israel. 1 Nephi 11:31, 12:9, Matthew 4:23-24, Revelations 21:14, Luke 22:30, also that one of these apostles, called John, will write the Apocalypse. 1 Nephi 14:22, 27, Revelations 1:1. Christ's enemies will scourge him, they smite him, they spit upon him, and he will be betrayed into the hands of wicked men, to be crucified. 1 Nephi 19:9-10, Matthew 27:26, 30:31, 26:45. He will be lifted up upon the cross so that he may draw all men unto him. These anachronistic details, which go far beyond Old Testament prophecy for the same period, recommend Isaiah and the four Gospels as a primary source for these writings. Christ's teachings in 3 Nephi. Stendhal's thesis is further illustrated in 3 Nephi, where 246 verses out of 490, 11:3-28-14, 50%, contain recognizable KJV quotations or phrases. Commentary accounts for the remaining verses. Even more significantly, there are no original motifs in 3 Nephi that are not already found in the Gospels. If Jesus visited ancient America, the 3 Nephi text is probably not an actual account of his appearances. Christ is represented as saying during his first and second visits to the Nephites, I command you that ye shall write these sayings and write the things which I have told you. 3 Nephi 16:4, 23:4. They do so. 3 Nephi 19:8, 23:14, and Mormon includes Christ's sayings on the gold tablets that Moroni buries. 3 Nephi 26:7. Joseph Smith tells us that he retrieved the gold plates in 1827 and translated them from Reformed Egyptian into English. Mormon 9:32. He thus had the very words of Christ available to him, but curiously chose not to use them for at least half the verses in 3 Nephi 11:28. This raises a question about the Book of Mormon's role as a second witness of Christ, where half of the words and ideas represented as being uttered by Christ came from an Old World Bible text. By Joseph's own account, the King James Bible was corrupt, not translated correctly, 8th article of faith, and produced without the original manuscripts. We are left with little to convince us. Although no eyewitness accounts mention that Joseph used a Bible during the translation, a blanket sometimes shielded Joseph from Martin Harris's view. Apparently there was no screening device during the time that Oliver Cowdery did the writing. See Figure 19. Oliver was Joseph's main scribe day after day and perhaps the only one who really knew if a Bible was consulted. Oliver is silent on the Matthew. In fact, a Bible would have been needed only when quoting long passages, so again, Cowdery may be the only witness who knew about this, and he neglected to mention it. A thesis composed by a Protestant minister shows that the Book of Mormon contains 26 full chapters from a 1769 edition of the KJV, in addition to quotations from other verses. An LDS Scholars article on 3 Nephi 12:14, the Sermon at the Temple, demonstrates that Joseph's use of the KJV includes the modern errors which accumulated in the handwritten manuscripts and KJV over the centuries. Some of these are by them of old time. Matthew 5:27, 3 Nephi 12:27, should be cast into hell. Matthew 5:30, 3 Nephi 12:30, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and which despitefully use you. Matthew 5:44, 3 Nephi 12:44, and for thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever. Amen. Matthew 6:13, 3 Nephi 13:13. These and other phrases indicate that an ancient source was not used for this sermon, nor for the many other biblical quotations throughout the Book of Mormon. Yet, we still say that the plates of brass were brought by the people of Lehi from Jerusalem in 600 BC. Many quotations from these plates, citing Isaiah and other biblical and non-biblical prophets, appear in the Book of Mormon. John W. Welch, an LDS scholar, suggests another explanation for how Joseph obtained the long KJV passages found in the Book of Mormon. He wrote, God projected a text similar to the KJV biblical text through Joseph Smith, or the power of God brought that text especially to his memory. The problem with this is, if Joseph received these portions of the Book of Mormon by revelation, why would they include the modern mistakes as part of that revelation? Why would God reveal to Joseph Smith a faulty KJV text? In other words, the textual evidence shows that the Bible was a primary source for the miracles, quotations, stories, names, and prophecies in the Book of Mormon, all of which provided a basis for Joseph's interpreting and tragedizing. It is reasonable to conclude that Joseph knew the Bible text intimately and used it extensively. LDS members have been slow to recognize this, while critics have recognized it from the beginning. Among the first to draw attention to this fact were 10 anonymous Palmyra, New York, residents in a letter to the Painesville Telegraph, printed on 22nd of March 1831. They wrote the book is chiefly garbled from the Old and New Testaments. The Apocrypha, having contributed its share, names and phrases have been altered, and in many instances copied upwards expanded. A quarto Bible now in this village, was borrowed and nearly worn out and defaced by their dirty handling. Some 7 or 8 of them spent many months in copying, Cowdery being principal scribe. The tone of the letter notwithstanding, its claim is worth considering. I will give a sampling of text borrowed from biblical sources, especially from the 4 Gospels, in 10 chapters of 3rd Nephi relating to Jesus' short ministry in America. These examples do not include the 6 full Bible chapters from Matthew, Isaiah, and Malachi, 3rd Nephi 9, John 1, 14, Revelations 22, I am in the Father, and the Father in me. I came unto my own, and my own received me not, and as many as have received me, to them have I given to become the sons of God, and even so will I to as many as shall believe on my name. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. 15:18. I am in the Father, and the Father in me. He came unto his own, and his own received him not. But as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. John 14:11, 1:11-12, Revelations 22:13, 3rd Nephi 11, Mark 16. And whoso believeth in me, and is baptized, the same shall be saved, and whoso believeth not in me shall be damned. 33:34. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved, but he that believeth not shall be damned. 16. 3rd Nephi 15. John 10. Other sheep I have which are not of this fold, and other sheep I have, which are not of this, found in 3rd Nephi 12:14, 22, and 24:25, or the lengthy quotes from 3 other Bible chapters. According to the Book of Mormon, these 10 examples are statements that were uttered by Jesus in AD 34, predating the yet unwritten texts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Peter, and Paul. These parallels lead to the conclusion that Joseph Smith obtained not only the quotations but the information generally from a King James translation for all 18 chapters of Christ's visit in 3rd Nephi. It is hard to imagine that these are Christ's unique words to the Nephites, recorded soon after he uttered them and then included on the plates Joseph received. Like the prophecies of 1 and 2 Nephi, the teaching ministry of Christ more likely came from the New Testament than from a Nephite record. Them also I must bring, and they shall hear my voice, and there shall be one fold and one shepherd. 17. Fold them also I must bring, and they shall hear my voice, and there shall be one fold, and one shepherd. 16. 3rd Nephi 17, Luke 7, John 11, Mark 10. They did bow down at his feet, and did worship him. And as many as could come, for the multitude did kiss his feet, insomuch that they did bathe his feet with their tears. Jesus groaned within himself, and said, I am troubled. He wept. And he took their little children, one by one, and blessed them. 10:14. 21. She stood at his feet behind him, weeping, and began to wash his feet with tears and kissed his feet. When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, he groaned in the spirit, and was troubled. And Jesus wept, and he took them children up in his arms, put his hands upon them, and blessed them. Luke 7:38, John 11:33, 35, Mark 10:16, 3 Nephi 18, Matthew 7, 1 Corinthians 11. And if ye shall always do these things, blessed are ye, for ye are built upon my rock. But whoso among you shall do more or less than these are not built upon my rock, but are built upon a sandy foundation. And when the rain descends, and the floods come, and the wind blow, and beat upon them, they shall fall. Ye shall not suffer anyone knowingly to partake of my flesh and blood unworthily. When ye therefore whosoever heareth these sayings of mine, and doeth them, is like a wise man, which built his house upon a rock. And every one that heareth these sayings and doeth them not, is like a foolish man, which built his house upon the sand. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat upon that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. But let a man examine himself, and shall minister it. For whoso eateth and drinketh my flesh and blood unworthily eateth and drinketh damnation to his soul. 12:13, 28-29. So let him eat of that bread, and drink of that cup. For he that eateth and drinketh unworthily, eateth and drinketh damnation to himself, not discerning the Lord's body. Matthew 7:24-27, 1 Corinthians 11:27-29, 3 Nephi 19, John 17:18. Father, I thank thee that thou hast given the Holy Ghost unto these whom I have chosen, and it is because of their belief in me that I have chosen them out of the world. And now, Father, I pray unto thee for them, and also for all those who shall believe on their words, that they may believe in me, that I may be in them as thou, Father, art in me, that we may be one. Father, I pray not for the world, but for those whom thou hast given me out of the world, that I may be glorified in them. And when Jesus had spoken these words, he came again unto his disciples. 20, 23, 29, 30. Father, the hour is come, I have manifested thy name unto the men which thou gavest me out of the world. Thine they were, and thou gavest them to me. Neither pray I for these alone, but for them also which shall believe on me through their word, that they all may be one, as thou, Father, art in me, and I in thee, that they also may be one in us. I pray not for the world, but for them which thou hast given me. I am glorified in them. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went forth with his disciples. 17:1, 6, 20:21, 9:10, 18:1. Heal a man 14, 3 Nephi 23, Matthew 27. And many graves shall be opened, and shall yield up many of their dead, and many saints shall appear unto many. Heal men 14:25. There were many saints who in the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose, and came out of the graves after his resurrection, and went into the holy city, and should arise from the dead, and should appear unto many. 3 Nephi 23:9. Appeared unto many. 52:53. 3 Nephi 26. 2 Peter 3. Revelations 20. John 5:1. The elements should melt with fervent heat, and the earth should be wrapped together as a scroll, and the heavens and the earth should pass away, and even unto the great and last day, when all people shall stand before God, to be judged of their works, whether they be good or whether they be evil. If they be good, to the resurrection of everlasting life, and if they be evil, to the resurrection of damnation. 3:5. The heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat, the earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the dead were judged according to their works, they that have done good, unto the resurrection of life, and they that have done evil, unto the resurrection of damnation. 2 Peter 3:10, Revelations 20:12, John 5:29, 3 Nephi 27, John 12:15, Matthew 6:7. That I might be lifted up upon the cross, that I might draw all men unto me. Whatsoever things ye shall ask the Father in my name shall be given unto you. Therefore, ask, and ye shall receive; knock, and it shall be opened unto you. For he that asketh, receiveth, and unto him that knocketh, it shall be opened. But behold, it sorroweth me because they will sell me for silver and gold, and I, if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men unto me. Whatsoever ye shall ask of the Father in my name, he may give it you ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and ye shall find, knock, and it shall be opened unto you. For everyone that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh it shall be opened. Lay not up for yourselves treasure upon earth, where moth and rust, that which moth doth corrupt, and which thieves can break through and steal. Enter ye in at the strait gate, for strait is the gate and narrow is the way that leads to life, and few there be that find it. But wide is the gate, and broad the way which leads to death, and many there be that travel therein. 14, 28, 29, 32, 33. Doth corrupt, and where thieves can break through and steal. Enter ye in at the strait gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way, that leadeth to destruction, and many there be which go in thereat. Because strait is the gate, and narrow is the way, which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. John 12:32, 15:16, Matthew 6:19, 7:7-8, 13:14, 3 Nephi 28, 1 Corinthians 15, 2 Corinthians 12. Ye shall be changed in the twinkling of an eye. From mortality to immortality they were caught up into heaven, and saw and heard unspeakable things. And it was forbidden them that they should utter whether they were in the body or out of the body. They could not tell. 8, 13, 15. We shall all be changed in the twinkling of an eye. This mortal must put on immortality as one caught up to the third heaven. And I knew such a man, whether in the body, or out of the body, I cannot tell. God knoweth, and heard unspeakable words, which it is not lawful for a man to utter. 1 Corinthians 15, 51, 53, 2 Corinthians 12:2-4. What is obvious about this section of the Book of Mormon is that it was borrowed from the KJV and placed in an ancient American context. In some cases, there are still rough edges. Jesus uses the Nephite monetary term, senine, rather than farthing. 3 Nephi 12:26, Matthew 5:26, and omits references to scribes and Pharisees. 3 Nephi 12:20, Matthew 5:20, and to swearing oaths by Jerusalem. 3 Nephi 12:35, Matthew 5:35. But the Book of Mormon retains references to Raca and to being in danger of the council. 3 Nephi 12:22, Matthew 5:22. Whosoever shall say to his brother, Raca, a curse and term of hatred, shall be in danger of the council. Committing Raca in Palestine resulted in being brought before the Jewish Sanhedrin or council. As an Aramaic word, Raca would not have been intelligible to a Nephite. Jesus also told the Nephites, Whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him, to Wayne. This refers to the Roman law that required a slave to carry a burden 1 mile when asked by a Roman citizen. It would presumably have had no meaning in the New World. 3 Nephi 12:41, Matthew 5:41. 3 Nephi. Miracles. A fifth area of comparison with the New Testament involves Jesus' miracles, repeated in the New World setting. As B.H. Roberts noted, they are both repeated and enhanced. They become more miraculous. Following are a few examples from 3 Nephi. Jesus' birth. In Matthew, the sign of Jesus' birth is a star in the east. In the Book of Mormon, the sign is a new star that shall arise, such an one as ye never have beheld. The precise time of the anticipated birth is known only to Mary, Joseph, Zachariah, and Elizabeth in the Old World. But in 3 Nephi the entire Nephite civilization knows the exact day. Samuel the Lamanite, 5 years previously, predicts that the birth will be accompanied by 3 days of sunlight, as though it was midday, a sign not found in the Bible even though Central America and Bethlehem are both in the Northern Hemisphere. 3 Nephi 1, 1821, Matthew 2:2. Halament. 1425. Parallel ministry of Nephi and Jesus. Nephi's 3-year ministry, 3 Nephi 7:8, covers the same time period as Jesus' own mortal ministry, AD 31-33. Christus Stendhal's view of these chapters is that they transpose the ministry of Jesus as seen in Nephi the prophet, into a man of miracles acting in the name of Jesus. Nephi is portrayed in this manner, and he did minister many things unto them, and all them cannot be written, and a part of them would not suffice, therefore they are not written in this book. And Nephi did minister with power and with great authority. They were angry with him, even because he had greater power. Angels did minister unto him daily. He cast out devils and unclean spirits, and even his brother did he raise from the dead. He did also do many more miracles, in the sight of the people, in the name of Jesus, and many were healed of their sicknesses and their infirmities. 3 Nephi 7:17-22. The impression is that Nephi's ministry draws from the miraculous power and authority of Jesus' ministry during the same 3 years, but in a different part of the world. Jesus' death and resurrection. When Christ died, the sun was darkened for 3 hours and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent. Nevertheless, this must have been a minor quake. No damage was reported, and Matthew was the only gospel writer to mention it. But in 3 Nephi, the quake lasts a full 3 hours and causes tremendous destruction to lives, cities, and buildings. It mostly kills the wicked, sparing the righteous. The darkness lasts not 3 hours but 3 days. In addition, the entire civilization knows that Christ has died because the darkness was prophesied. In Jerusalem, this was not the case. 3 Nephi 8:10, Matthew 27:45, 51, 54. Luke 23:45. From the New Testament we learn that Jesus showed himself to a few chosen disciples and to a group of 500 men at once after his resurrection. His wounds were shown to his apostles and a few others. This occurred in a private setting. Only the apostle Thomas wished to touch the wounds. In 3 Nephi a crowd of 2,500 not only sees but touches the wounds. 3 Nephi 11:14-16, 17:25. John 20:20, 24, 27, 1 Corinthians 15:1-8. Miracles and blessings during Jesus' 3-year ministry. He performed healings, cast out evil spirits, controlled nature, and raised the dead. In 3 Nephi, Jesus again performs miracles in all these categories during a 3-day period. He makes bread and wine from nothing, raises the dead, and heals multitudes of people who were sick, and who were afflicted with all manner of diseases, and with devils and unclean spirits. 3 Nephi 17:7-9, 26:8, 26:15, 1 Nephi 11:31. Jesus was known to bless little children. In 3 Nephi when he blesses the children, angels encircle them, prompting even babies to utter greater things than Jesus speaks, although these things were not allowed to be written down. 3 Nephi 17:21-25. Matthew 19:13-15, 26:14, 16, Luke 18:15-16, Mark 10:13-16. Jesus feeding the multitude. The Gospel writers described a hungry multitude of more than 5,000 with only 5 loaves and 2 fish among them. Jesus multiplied the loaves and fish and fed the people until they were full. In 3 Nephi, when it was time to institute the sacrament, an exceedingly great number had gathered. Jesus produced the bread and wine from nothing, and the people partook of the sacrament until they were filled physically and spiritually. 3 Nephi 19:1-3, 5, 20, 2-9, Matthew 14:15-21, Mark 6:38-44, Luke 9:13-17, John 6:9-14. Day of Pentecost. The Holy Ghost came upon the 12 apostles at a private residence in Jerusalem. It appeared as a strong wind and cloven tongues like fire that rested upon them. The 12 were moved to speak in tongues. In 3 Nephi the Holy Ghost comes upon the 12 disciples in a public setting, witnessed by multitudes, and encircles them as if it were by fire, as angels minister to them. 3 Nephi 19:13-14, Acts 2:1-4. Transfiguration of Peter, James, and John. In the Gospels, Jesus took Peter, James, and John to a high mountain. Here Jesus became brilliant and unearthly white. Moses and Elijah appeared, and the apostles heard the voice of the Father bearing record of his only begotten Son. In 3 Nephi the entire multitude witnessed the Nephite 12 turn white, even as Jesus. They heard prayers by Jesus which cannot be written, neither can they be uttered by man. The Nephite 12 saw and heard miraculous things which even Peter, James, and John had not witnessed. So great faith have I never seen among all the Jews, wherefore I could not show unto them so great miracles, because of their unbelief. Verily I say unto you, there are none of them that have seen so great things as ye have seen, neither have they heard so great things as ye have heard. 3 Nephi 19:30-36, Matthew 17:1-5, Mark 9:2-7. Jesus promised to John,